Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Sarah Papenheim. Sarah Papenheim was born on January 30th, 1997, in Minnesota. She was the second child of Donnie Odegaard and Jerry Papenheim, with an older brother named Josh. The siblings developed a strong bond as they grew older. When Sarah was in second grade, her family relocated from Minneapolis to Redding, California. She graduated from Foothill High School in 2015, where she was an active member of the school band and played the drums. Sarah was passionate about music, especially drumming. She was a skilled drummer and regularly played at jam sessions in Redding. As one of the few female drummers, she stood out on stage. When Sarah was 18, she moved back to her hometown in Minnesota with her mother and brother after her parents got divorced. There, she continued to play drums at different venues and eventually met Bernard Allison, a famous blues guitarist and singer. Allison was impressed with her skills and invited her to join him on stage occasionally. By the time Sarah turned 19, she had become a local celebrity among blues fans, known for her bright smile, which earned her the nickname Ronald McDonald. Meanwhile, her brother Josh was struggling with depression and mental health issues after their parents' divorce. Tragically, on an ordinary day in February 2016, the police arrived at their doorstep and delivered devastating news to Sarah's mother. Josh took his own life at the age of 20, leaving his loved ones, especially his mother Sarah, heartbroken. The bond between Sarah and Josh was incredibly strong, and his passing devastated her. To cope with her loss and to help others who struggle with mental health, Sarah decided to study psychology. She had been in touch with Nico Carson Major, who lived in the Netherlands, and she moved there to pursue her studies. At Erasmus University in Rotterdam, Sarah began her psychology program with Nico's support, who not only helped her navigate her grief but also assisted her with her studies as a native speaker. Sarah's passion for music never faded despite her focus on studies and work. She stayed in touch with Bernard Allison, a musician she had performed with, and shared her dream of buying a drum kit. In January 2017, Bernard's band toured Europe, and on Sarah's 20th birthday, January 30th, she attended Bernard's concert in Germany with Nico. Bernard spotted her in the audience, invited her on stage, and let her play the drums with them, just like old times. Sarah lived on the third floor of an apartment complex near the university in Rotterdam. As 2018 drew to a close, she planned to spend Christmas in the United States and booked a flight for a week before New Year's Eve. However, on December 12th, her life took a devastating turn. When a police officer appeared at her doorstep, just like in 2016 when her son had passed away, Sarah's legs began to shake. She instinctively knew what the officer was about to tell her, but couldn't bear the thought of losing another loved one. When the officer informed Sarah's mother that her daughter had passed away, she was overcome with grief and lost consciousness. This devastating news came just a year after the loss of her son, who had died at the age of 20. Sarah was only 21 years old. Sarah lived in a student complex on the third floor, where she rented an apartment with her roommate, Joel Schelling. Joel was also a musician, and music was the common interest that brought them together. Unlike Sarah, who was outgoing and always smiling, Joel was more reserved and had a temper. Despite their occasional quarrels, Sarah remained a supportive friend to Joel, often calming him down when he became angry. However, the situation took a turn for the worse over time. Just 6 days before her death, Sarah confided in her friend Adam Pryor that she was afraid of Joel, who had threatened to harm 3 people he disliked. Sarah knew she had to go to the police. Just a couple of days before her death, she had spoken to her mother on the phone about her concerns. Sarah's roommate, Joel, was behaving in a way that was increasingly bothering her. Her mother advised her to find a new place to live as soon as possible and to avoid Joel until she could move out. On December 12, 2018, at 12:20 p.m., the police received a call from Sarah and Joel's next-door neighbors, who reported hearing a loud fight and then Sarah screaming. When the police arrived, they found Sarah lying on the floor with multiple stab wounds. Despite attempts to revive her, Sarah died from her injuries. The police immediately began searching for Joel, who was nowhere to be found. Neighbors reported that he had left the apartment in a hurry, taking a large double bass with him. This distinctive instrument became a key detail in the police's description of Joel. Less than 2 hours after the crime, 23-year-old Joel Schelling was arrested at Eindhoven train station, about 60 miles from Rotterdam. He was on his way to visit his parents, who lived in Eindhoven. After Joel was arrested, he made a shocking confession to his mother while on the train. He told her that he had taken Sarah's life. The judge subsequently placed Joel under arrest for 14 days to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. Meanwhile, forensic experts conducting the autopsy on Sarah's body found 27 stab wounds, with several of them on her neck, abdomen, and back. 2 days after Sarah passed away, her mother, Doni Odegaard, traveled to the Netherlands to arrange for her daughter's body to be returned home. However, this required raising $40,000, a task that was made possible by the generosity of strangers who cared for the family. Upon learning of Joel's arrest, Doni Odegaard inquired if her daughter had contacted the police. Sarah had instead reached out to social workers, who visited Joel and found him calm. However, the next day, Sarah again contacted social services due to Joel's erratic behavior, including hitting himself with a hammer and threatening to harm multiple people. The case against Schelling began in March 2019. Schelling was accused of causing Sarah Papenheim's death and admitted his guilt. However, he claimed he did not remember the actual act of taking her life. According to Schelling, he recalled fighting with Sarah, but his next memory was of being in the shower, cleaning himself. Sarah's mother, Doni Odegaard, attended each hearing, relying on an interpreter to understand the proceedings. During the trial, Schelling stated that he suffered from delirium and heard voices in his head. However, when asked if these voices had instructed him to fight with Sarah, Schelling said he did not know and could not recall. He also could not remember the cause of their fight. Prior to the verdict, experts testified that Schelling suffered from multiple disorders and required long-term treatment. Despite this, they concluded that Schelling was responsible for Sarah's death. The verdict was announced in December 2019. Sarah Papenheim's death occurred before she could receive a response to her second request for support, after her initial request for assistance from social workers went unresponded due to the specialist's unavailability. The medics concluded that Schelling was aware of the initial fight and scuffle with Sarah and had the opportunity to either stop the altercation or grab the knife. By choosing the latter, he should be held accountable for his actions. The prosecutor requested a 10-year prison sentence, but the judge in Rotterdam gave Schelling a 6-year prison term, followed by an indefinite sentence in a psychiatric hospital. The court reduced the sentence from 10 years due to Schelling's relatively young age and his significantly diminished mental capacity at the time of the crime. This means that the court did not consider Schelling fully responsible for his actions. When handing down the sentence, the court released a detailed explanation stating that, although the crime was severe and unpredictable, Schelling's serious psychological disorders made it likely that he would commit another violent crime. The court noted that Schelling suffers from chronic psychological disorders that require ongoing treatment in a clinical setting. The court viewed psychiatric detention as a punitive measure for Schelling, who has expressed a willingness to undergo treatment for depression and other disorders. The court has ruled that Schelling will remain in treatment until it determines he is well enough to be released. The court will review his status every 2 years. Additionally, Schelling has been ordered to pay €68,700 in compensation to Sarah's family. Doni Odegaard is outraged by the sentence, believing it is too lenient. she thinks Schelling should have received a minimum sentence of 10 years in prison. In her opinion, Schelling would have faced a much harsher sentence in the US, such as life imprisonment or the death penalty, which would have prevented him from committing a similar crime in the future. She is also concerned that Schelling may be eligible for parole in as little as 4 years and vowed to do everything in her power to keep him behind bars. An investigation was also conducted into the social workers who had interacted with Sarah. The investigation concluded that the social workers could not be held accountable for failing to identify Schelling's disorders because they did not possess the necessary expertise to make such a diagnosis. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Doreen Erbert. Doreen Erbert was born on November 29, 1952, in California. She grew up in a very large family with 5 children. Doreen was a kind and positive person who always sought to help others. Since her school years, she decided to pursue a career that would allow her to help people. After college, she moved to San Francisco and started working as a physiotherapist. Doreen also dreamed of creating her own big family. When she was 24 years old, she met a man named Michael Dennis, who worked at a factory near her clinic. The couple began dating, and a few months later, they decided to get married. In 1976, their son Paul was born. Initially, Michael and Doreen were happy together, but after the birth of their child, their relationship started to deteriorate. Within a year, they decided to divorce, and their son stayed with his mother, while Michael could regularly visit him. A year later, Doreen met a man named Charles. They began dating, got married, and decided to move to San Jose, settling in a quiet residential area. In 1979, their daughter Diana was born. Charles, like his wife, dreamed of having a big family. He raised her son and was overjoyed at the arrival of their daughter. However, a tragic incident occurred in the family in February 1980 when 4-year-old Paul climbed over the fence surrounding their pool and fell into the water. Doreen, who was at home at the time, noticed it too late. She pulled her son out of the water and called for an ambulance. They took the child to the hospital and connected him to a life support machine, but after 10 days, the doctors concluded that there was no chance of survival. The decision was made to disconnect him from the machine. Doreen was broken, and she couldn't stop blaming herself, even though the police investigation showed it wasn't her fault. Nevertheless, the woman continued to live, and her little daughter helped her cope with this tragedy. 4 years after the tragic events, something good finally happened with the family. Doreen and Charles had been trying to have another child for a long time, but unfortunately, the pregnancies had been interrupted twice. Eventually, Doreen became pregnant again, and this time, everything was going well. The couple was expecting the arrival of a boy, scheduled to be born in early November. Just a few days before Doreen was supposed to go to the hospital, the family decided to participate in Halloween activities. It was the evening of October 31st, and all the neighbors decorated their homes, handed out candies, and went trick-or-treating with their children in the neighborhood. Diana, who was 4 at the time, really wanted to join in, and her parents couldn't refuse. Despite Doreen being 9 months pregnant, she went trick-or-treating with her daughter, while Charles stayed home, handing out candies to other kids. The mother and daughter returned home shortly before 9 p.m. Charles informed his wife that they were running out of candies, and he planned to drive to the nearest store to refill their supplies because he didn't want to leave the neighborhood kids without treats. He left the house around 8:50 p.m. and returned approximately 15 minutes later. Approaching the house, he noticed that the front door was slightly open, which seemed unusual. However, what he encountered inside was a genuine nightmare. Upon entering, he discovered his wife Doreen lying on the corridor floor, surrounded by a substantial amount of blood. Doreen showed no signs of life, and Charles immediately called 911. Soon, he noticed that the body of their unborn child lay in the living room. The man was in a deep state of shock, unable to believe what he was witnessing. At one point, the thought crossed his mind that Doreen might have had a miscarriage, but he quickly realized the situation was much more severe. Next to the child's body, he found a human hand, and Charles immediately understood it belonged to Doreen. Realizing that someone had attacked his family, he began searching for his daughter, fearing that something might have happened to her as well. There was so much blood on the floor that the man even slipped and fell while running through the house. Fortunately, the girl was alive. She was hiding behind the sofa in the living room. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics found a weak pulse in Doreen and rushed her to the hospital. Unfortunately, they couldn't save her, and she passed away in the ambulance. Her child also did not survive. Besides being removed from the woman's womb, the unknown assailant had inflicted numerous blows on the baby. Medical experts examined Doreen's body and concluded that she had been struck numerous times with a long, sharp object resembling a sword or machete. Meanwhile, the police investigated the house, which resembled a scene from a horrific horror movie. Later, several officers sought psychological help, as even they couldn't cope with what they had witnessed. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, walls, and even the ceiling. Investigators examined the entire house, but didn't find the perpetrator or any clues outside the house. Police saw bloody footprints on the sidewalk, which stopped in the middle of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had gotten into a car at that spot. Soon, officers discovered another clue on the lawn in front of the house, a wolf mask covered in blood. They speculated that it might belong to the killer. As Charles stated, they never owned such a mask. The evidence was sent to the laboratory, and police tried to talk to Diana, the girl who was the sole witness to what happened, and potentially could help identify the assailant. Diana told them that shortly after her father left for the store, someone knocked on their door. Doreen went to answer and saw a man in a wolf mask holding a long blade. He told her, "I'm going to kill you now." After that, the woman screamed at her daughter to run out of the house, and the girl hid behind the sofa. Diana couldn't recall what happened next until the moment when her father found her. She also couldn't help the police identify the attacker, as he was wearing a wolf mask. Initially, investigators considered the victim's husband, Charles, as a suspect. They found it suspicious that his trip to the store coincided with the arrival of the killer, as Doreen was attacked just minutes after her husband left home. When Charles returned, he stepped on blood multiple times, even falling and getting covered in it. Police didn't rule out the possibility that he might have done this intentionally to have an excuse for the blood on his clothes. However, detectives quickly found several inconsistencies in this theory. Firstly, Charles's shoes clearly didn't match those that left bloody footprints on the street. Secondly, the killer likely got into a car parked on the road in front of the house, but there were no blood traces found in Charles's vehicle or a different pair of shoes. Police went to the store Charles visited and spoke to the staff member, who confirmed that Charles did buy candies from him that evening, indicating he didn't have time to commit the murder. Surveillance footage from the store also supported this alibi, so detectives temporarily stopped considering him the prime suspect. They asked Charles if he had anyone in mind who might wish harm to his family, and the men immediately pointed to Doreen's ex-husband, Michael. According to Charles, initially, Michael maintained a normal relationship with his ex-wife, but everything changed after the death of their son, who drowned in the pool. Michael blamed Doreen, believing she deliberately killed the boy to cut all connections with him. He even filed a civil lawsuit against her, seeking to hold her responsible for the child's death, but lost the case. Even during the time when Michael and Doreen were still married, he occasionally behaved quite strangely. After the birth of their son, he often fell into depression, distancing himself from both his wife and child. Doreen believed all of this somehow connected to his childhood traumas. Michael had hearing problems from an early age, requiring him to constantly wear a bulky hearing aid. In those days, it was a rather large device, and because of it, other children constantly teased Michael. All of this led to the man growing up introverted, practically having no friends and avoiding interaction with women. Despite seemingly leaving these issues behind after meeting Doreen, Michael couldn't shake off his old problems completely. This became one of the main reasons for the couple's decision to divorce. When Doreen married Charles, Michael began harboring resentment and animosity towards her, especially disliking the fact that another man was raising his son. These feelings intensified after Paul's death, and he started genuinely hating his ex-wife. Michael also lost his job, where he had spent most of his adult life, and this factor also had some negative effect on him. After hearing all of this, the detectives decided to go to the man's house and talk to him. Charles's account was clearly insufficient to make Michael the prime suspect, but since he lived only 2 miles from Doreen's house, they decided to pay him a visit right away. Officers arrived at his home around midnight and saw the pickup truck parked near the garage. They shined a flashlight inside and saw something resembling blood on the steering wheel and keys. Afterward, they knocked on the door, but nobody answered. The lights were on, and officers could hear water running inside the house, leading them to suspect that the man might be disposing of evidence or cleaning blood-stained clothes. So they continued knocking. Michael eventually opened the door. He remained calm, even after being informed about his ex-wife's murder. The man answered all their questions nonchalantly and allowed the officers inside without a warrant. According to him, he went to the store during the day, returned home, and hadn't left since. Michael even agreed to sign voluntary consent papers to allow a search of his house. As he reached for the pen to sign, investigators noticed a deep cut on his right hand. Michael claimed he accidentally cut himself earlier while carving a pumpkin for Halloween, but the police doubted his words. The wound was visibly fresh, and blood was still oozing from it. Meanwhile, a few officers started searching his house. Michael went upstairs with one of them since they asked him to show his ID. When they entered his bedroom, Michael reached for the bed headboard, but the officer immediately told him to step aside. His actions seemed suspicious. Why would he keep his documents behind the bed? When the officer approached, he saw a holster hanging on the bed headboard with a loaded gun inside. He took the weapon and led Michael downstairs to the other officers. Meanwhile, his colleagues discovered blood droplets on the floor, leading them to a washing machine in the garage and a pile of clothes with blood stains. This was sufficient for an arrest, and they took the man into custody. Afterward, detectives, along with forensic experts, scrutinized the house more thoroughly, seeking evidence that might link Michael to the murder. The analysis of the blood would take a few days, and meanwhile, the police found some new gruesome discoveries. At first, they uncovered an empty box for a machete with an 18-inch blade. Medical experts confirmed that it perfectly matched the wounds on Doreen's body. Secondly, Michael had 2 makeshift coffins in his house, leading detectives to suspect they were intended for Doreen and her husband. Additionally, the police found body bags typically used by medical staff. Considering Michael had no association with these items, it raised significant suspicion. Putting all these pieces together, the police went to the judge to request a warrant for the suspect's arrest for an extended period. Without it, they could only detain him for a limited time. However, the judge deemed the evidence too circumstantial, and as a result, Michael had to be released, and the man walked free. Nevertheless, 3 days later, the detectives got the answer from the lab. Experts found 2 types of blood at the crime scene belonging to different individuals. Blood type analysis revealed that the majority of it shared the same blood type as Doreen, with a small amount matching Michael's. Apparently, the man injured himself during the attack on his ex-wife. This time, the judge promptly issued an arrest warrant, and Michael was officially charged with the murder of his ex-wife and her unborn child. They learned he owned the exact same wolf mask found near Doreen's house on the previous Halloween. He wore it to a party, and police even discovered a photo of Michael wearing the mask to eliminate any doubts. They found in his home the exact clothing he wore in that photo. But the story of the mask didn't end there. To further strengthen the case, police interviewed all of Doreen's neighbors about that evening. It turned out that children going door to door for candy saw an adult man wearing a wolf mask standing across the street from the victim's house, staring at it. Michael's trial began in July 1988, 4 years after the murder. Initially, he pleaded guilty, but later changed his plea. He didn't deny committing the murder, but claimed innocence due to mental health issues. A psychologist assigned to him concluded that he indeed had serious mental problems. Michael told the psychologist that witnessing other kids joyfully trick-or-treating on Halloween reminded him of Paul's death, triggering his breakdown. According to Michael, he went to Doreen's house with a machete on that evening. When she opened the door, he said, "You killed my son," and added that he intended to murder her. She immediately recognized him as the man behind the mask, screamed for her daughter to run, and in the next second, Michael attacked her. Michael insisted that he was unaware of Doreen's pregnancy, a claim that seemed hard to believe, as her friends insisted it was impossible not to notice her pregnancy before the tragedy. They even joked that because of her belly, Doreen had become broader than taller. The prosecution argued that the man was fully aware of his actions and had planned the crime in advance. During the investigation, detectives discovered he had told friends about his desire to kill his ex-wife and her husband, then dispose of their bodies in the bay. Given that they found 2 body bags in his home, the prosecution suggested he intended to carry out this plan, but changed his mind for some reason. Perhaps he panicked or feared staying in the house too long, thinking he might get caught. Doreen's daughter Diana also testified at the trial. At that time, she was 9 years old and still vividly remembered what happened. Charles didn't want his daughter to go through such a traumatic experience, but she was the only witness. The trial spanned a year, and in the end, the man was found guilty of murdering Doreen and her child. Michael was sentenced to death, but while he awaited execution, California imposed a moratorium on the death penalty. As a result, Michael remains behind bars to this day, and his sentence is unlikely to be carried out anytime soon. Many years later, Diana revealed that this murder haunted her throughout her life, never allowing her to forget that horror for a moment. Eventually, she decided to forgive Michael and try to leave it all in the past, fearing she might lose her sanity otherwise. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Jessica Chambers. On December 6, 2014, at 8:09 p.m., emergency services received a report of a vehicle fire on a rural road. The first firefighters to arrive on the scene found a blazing Kia and began extinguishing the flames immediately. Inside the car was a hellish scene with black smoke billowing upwards rapidly. As the rescuers doused the vehicle with foam, they noticed a dark figure slowly emerging from the nearby underbrush, a silhouette that resembled either a young woman or a child. The victim was severely burned and looked like she had been through an ordeal beyond imagination. As this figure approached, it became clear that it was a young woman dressed only in her underwear and covered in burns from head to toe. She asked for help. Her clothes had been incinerated. Her hair had turned into charred lumps of ash, and her face was blackened. A firefighter wrapped her blistered body in a blanket and laid her on the ground as they awaited emergency medical services, EMS. They did not leave her side, even for a moment. Barely moving her lips, she tried uttering individual words which were indiscernible due to her condition. However, several emergency responders managed to make out names like Eric or Derek when asked who had assaulted her. She was promptly airlifted from this small rural town to a hospital in Memphis for immediate medical attention. After suffering severe burns covering about 93% of her body, the young woman, Jessica Lane Chambers, tragically passed away 4 hours later. Jessica Chambers, 19 years old, grew up living with her mother across the street from her grandmother, while her father and stepmother resided further down the street. Despite her petite and fragile appearance, she had a determined character. Her father had a history of legal issues, having pleaded guilty to manufacturing methamphetamine and being arrested for driving under the influence in the early 2000s. Growing up amidst such challenges, Jessica did not fit the mold of a quiet girl. She smoked, had frequent conflicts with her parents, maintained unstable relationships with boyfriends. Jessica's behavior became more concerning at 17 after the tragic death of her older brother Alan in a car accident in 2012. Following this tragedy, she moved out of her mother's home for several months. Her childhood was fraught with challenges. Her father even spent time in prison, but had been released by 2014 and was working as a mechanic at the local sheriff's department. Jessica sometimes engaged in unlawful activities, occasionally selling illegal substances and associating with local gangs. However, despite these transgressions, she maintained a reputation for being sweet and kind-hearted, earning respect and affection from almost everyone who knew her. The manner of Jessica's death intensely shocked her small hometown. Rapidly spreading rumors suggested that it involved a deliberate car fire incident. Given her father's position within the sheriff's department, he was quickly informed about the nearby car fire and his daughter's involvement. Following this devastating news, his wife rushed down the street to inform Jessica's mother about the tragedy. Initially, authorities thought the fire resulted from a car accident. Yet, this theory was quickly ruled out. No sign of emergency braking or any other obstacles were found at the scene. An examination of the burned vehicle also showed no signs of impact or damage. The theory then turned to arson. But at the time of the incident, police had few clues. The lack of evidence has prolonged the investigation. Investigators have investigated nearly everyone who may have come into contact with Jessica during her final days. They even investigated whether her boyfriend, who was in prison at the time, could have ordered her murder. However, this theory was dismissed because he has been living in Iowa since their breakup. Ali Alai, the owner of a gas station and one of the last people to see Jessica alive, also came under suspicion. He gave his statement and was released afterward. There was another theory that Jessica had brought trouble upon herself by associating with a local gang. However, gang members denied their involvement and expressed their condolences to the Chambers family. After some time, investigators reconstructed the last week of Jessica's life almost minute by minute up until her tragic end on December 5, 2014. Jessica received a call on her cell phone that day and drove to the M&M Mini Mart following a call from a friend. She bought $14 worth of gasoline and left in her car at 5:15 p.m. Around 5:45 p.m., she called her mother to say she would return in a little while. Her hair was pulled back in a bun, and she was dressed in camouflage pajama pants. Jessica made a few more stops, one at an unknown house and another in the nearest town, before arriving at the scene of her demise. She was possibly already accompanied in her car by the person who would end her life. Surveillance cameras caught a man in a striped shirt refueling a gas can before heading in the same direction as Jessica. However, there were no confirming data about his further movements. Cell phone records showed she spent about 10 to 15 minutes near a traffic light on Highway 6 heading towards Batesville. The subsequent 62 minutes between 6:30 p.m. and 7:32 p.m., also known as the mystery hour, took time to unravel. At 7:30 p.m., Jessica's phone indicated that she reached the location on Heron Road, where her burning car was later found. So where did Jessica Chambers go, and what led to her brutal fate? The investigation progressed slowly. In December 2015, during a case involving charges of illegal possession of weapons, controlled substances, and counterfeits, 17 suspected gang members were arrested. District Attorney John Champion did not expect any of these gang members to be directly linked to the burning incident involving Jessica Chambers. However, during plea negotiations, all gang members were offered the opportunity to assist with the investigation. Thus, the gang members pointed to a certain Quentin Tellis. Investigators finally learned who Jessica was within an hour before the fire. But in February 2016, authorities announced a pause in the case to conduct a more detailed investigation and establish a motive. The investigation became particularly interested in Quentin Tellis after revisiting social media and examining Jessica's cell phone. They identified whom she had been communicating with in the last hours of her life. During the first interrogation, 29-year-old Quentin Tellis recounted that their meeting, which had been arranged by text message, was the only time they met, and he did not know her well. He merely asked for a ride home. With more comprehensive information and all messages presented, Tellis was arrested on charges related to ending Jessica Chambers' life through arson. Text messages revealed that Tellis repeatedly requested from Jessica very intimate engagements on the day of the tragedy. That morning at 9:02 a.m., Jessica texted Quentin to say she had just woken up. He replied a few minutes later that he also had just woken up. At 10:09 a.m., Tellis texted Chambers saying, "I'm ready." Shortly after this exchange, she stopped at the M&M gas station where she was captured on surveillance footage leaving the premises. A few minutes later, they presumably picked up Tellis. Subsequently, around 10:49 a.m., they collected one of Jessica's friends. Later, at approximately 2:03 p.m., Jessica dropped Quentin off. Tellis then began messaging Jessica again. This time he explicitly asked for some affection. This was the fourth message in 4 days where he requested intimacy via text. Other deleted texts were recovered, including messages like, "I'm excited," and "Come lie with me," which Jessica did not answer. The passenger seat in Jessica Chambers' burned car was pushed back, a typical position for intimate activities in a vehicle. Prosecutors argued that this indicated the two were engaged in or attempting intimacy that evening. On February 24th, Tellis was charged with the murder of Jessica and arson. The investigation took considerable time to build the case. The first trial in the Jessica Chambers case commenced in 2017 in Batesville, Mississippi. Investigators stated that Jessica met Quentin Tellis around Thanksgiving in November 2014. He was 7 years her senior and had attended the same high school before she enrolled there. In October of that same year, he had been released from prison after serving time for burglary. FBI agent Dustin Blount testified during the first trial that he met Jessica through a friend at a gas station in Cortland, Mississippi. They spent a lot of time driving around together on multiple occasions. He even stated they had been intimate. Blount provided further details. The passenger seat was reclined back, and he was sitting there with Jessica on him. In court, John Champion mentioned a series of text messages between them on the day she died, requesting intimacy. The front seat in the burned car was adjusted downward, as Tellis had described during their previous encounter. Champion claimed that Tellis attempted to end her life by strangulation before proceeding to set the car ablaze. Jessica was found deceased after being doused with gasoline and set on fire. A friend of Jessica testified that the three of them had ridden in Jessica's car the day before the incident. Later, Tellis confessed to investigators that he saw Jessica that night, and they went to a fast food restaurant together. Various friends, who he claimed to have been with when the fire started, could not confirm his alibi. Tellis appeared on a store surveillance camera several miles away, where he was purchasing a phone card for a friend who lived in Louisiana. He did not testify in his own defense at the trial. A central element of the defense was that several emergency responders at the scene reported hearing Jessica utter the name Eric or Derek. Ultimately, 2 jurors noted that Quentin's name sounded nothing like Eric or Derek. Panola County District Attorney John Champion pointed to text messages in which Tellis repeatedly requested intimacy from Chambers. Champion testified at the first trial that there was a series of text messages, even on the day of her death, where Quentin consistently asked Jessica for intimacy and she consistently denied him. At the first trial, FBI agent Dustin Blount demonstrated that Tellis and Chambers met through a friend at a gas station in their small hometown of Cortland. They drove around together frequently, as recalled by agent Blount, who interrogated Tellis. He stated they had been intimate at some point. Agent Blount spoke with Tellis at his home 11 days after Jessica's passing and asked him to describe their intimate encounter and pinpoint where it occurred. Tellis indicated it happened in a driveway south of his house. Back in December 2014, Quentin Tellis shared a home with his mother in a trailer not far from the convenience store where Jessica Chambers was last seen before the fire. Tellis's DNA was discovered on Jessica's keys, and cell phone records indicated he was on that crucial night. Despite this evidence, Tellis has consistently asserted his innocence. Defense attorney Darla Palmer, during her opening statement, urged jurors to dismiss the cell phone location data. She argued it could not conclusively prove that Tellis and Chambers were at the same spot. Tellis has always insisted on his innocence, even telling police in an interrogation room, despite threats of capital punishment if tried, that he did not harm Jessica. Tellis's family argues that law enforcement is simply looking for someone to blame. The case has become highly charged and racially sensitive since Tellis, an African-American man, was arrested for the death of a white cheerleader like Jessica. Investigators sought connections to other recent fires across Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama, but found no links. The first trial in 2017 concluded in a mistrial due to issues related to jury. While they stated that a guilty verdict must be unanimous, they did not explicitly mention the same for a not guilty verdict. Officials observed that since jurors couldn't unanimously agree on Tellis's guilt, they inferred his innocence. The second trial was particularly challenging. Jurors were presented with a photograph of Jessica Chambers, taken by firefighter Cole upon his arrival at the scene. Cole explained that the image depicting Chambers with soot-blackened lips haunted him. "I see this photo every morning and every night," he shared the jury. A veteran firefighter related that he had never encountered a victim with such extensive burns before. He described finding the young woman lying on the ground, barely able to speak after having been deliberately set on fire. She was sitting on a blanket. Her hair was singed and stood around her nose and mouth, with blisters covering her body. Cole, who serves as the Panola County Director of Emergency Operations, informed the jurors, "I sat and held her hand. That's all I could do." Fighting back tears, firefighter Cole Haley recounted telling Chambers, "It's going to be okay," to which she replied, "I am going to die." At that point, Haley lay down beside her. He described how her skin was hanging from her lips and nose. Paramedic Bradley Dixon testified that her eyelashes and eyebrows were gone. The hair on her head was a warm, matted clump. Testimonies at this second hearing also included Sherry Flowers' account. She had not appeared at the first trial of Tellis, but had informed investigators during questioning that she picked up a hitchhiker on the night Jessica Chambers' life ended tragically. In court, Sherry Flowers did not recognize Tellis and agreed with the prosecutor that she did not know whom she had picked up. Despite not identifying Tellis in court, Sherry testified that a man flagged her down and she stopped because she thought it was her cousin. She agreed to give a ride to this individual, a young African-American male around 20 years old and of slim to medium build. Tellis, who stood 5'9" tall and was 26 at the time of the incident, somewhat fit this description. Initially, Flowers did not contact investigators. When asked why in court, she said she couldn't remember and thought it wasn't relevant to the case. Nevertheless, prosecutors attempted to link this ride to Jessica Chambers' demise by suggesting it provided Quintless the opportunity to leave Jessica's car in order to return later and set it on fire. However, Flowers admitted uncertainty about the exact time of ride, only stating, "I know I picked someone up." The investigator also noted that Jessica Chambers' keys were found in a ditch 2 days after her death, near where she supposedly picked up the hitchhiker. The defense objected to the keys being admitted into evidence, arguing it was impossible to prove their location at the relevant time. During the retrial, jurors were required to visit crime scenes and hear additional testimonies. This second trial was highly emotional. Witnesses broke down on the stand. Spectators wept as photos of Jessica Chambers' burned abdomen and face were shown. One of the first responders tearfully testified and embraced her father after stepping down from the stand. In 2018, just like in the initial trial, This second jury failed to reach a verdict in Quentin Tellis's case. It marked the second time in 2 years that a jury was deadlocked over whether Tellis was responsible for setting Jessica and her car on fire. Despite being tried twice, no conviction was secured, and the case remains officially unsolved. One of the most discussed aspects of Jessica Chambers' case is what transpired between her leaving home and her tragic end. Reports state that Jessica left her house at 5 p.m. on the night of the crime, telling her mother she was going to a nearby gas station. Regrettably, Jessica's mother Lisa passed away on October 29, 2021, at age 52, without seeing justice served for her daughter. In the Vicki Glass case, events unfolded unexpectedly. Vicki, a well-known figure in the city streets, became an enigma surrounded by unresolved questions. Her disappearance left behind numerous unsolved mysteries that concern everyone who has ever known her. Friday, September 24, 2021, marked the 21st anniversary of Vicki's tragic death. The police utilized this occasion to appeal to the public for new information. Following a thorough analysis of existing data, a new team led by Senior Supervisor Peter Carr will renew efforts into investigating her disappearance. Carr informed reporters that over the past year, extensive materials have been reviewed. They plan to interrogate all individuals potentially connected with this case and promised to employ innovative solutions. He emphasized that Vicki did not deserve such a fate, and her family deserves closure regarding what transpired. The police launched a website containing information about Vicki, details of her life and disappearance, as well as updates on the investigation's progress. In early November 2022, they received new surveillance footage showing Vicki on the day she disappeared. Carr addressed a press conference to discuss these new findings. The video depicted Vicki conversing with a man who sold washing machines. The police are appealing to the public for assistance in identifying this individual. Let us examine this mysterious figure named Vicki, whose life remains enshrouded in unanswered questions and secrets. On September 21, 1979, in Stockton-on-Tees, a small town nestled in the northeast of England on the banks of the rivers, Vicki was born. She had an older sister named Claire, who was just a year senior. Their parents, Deborah and Anthony, divorced when Vicki was only 6 years old. Following the separation, Deborah remarried to a man named Colin Goodall. With this marriage, Vicki gained an older half-sister named Cheryl and a younger brother called Thomas. Despite these additions to their family dynamic, they continued residing in Stockton. As a child, Vicki exhibited a profound interest in music. She admired Michael Jackson and had a particular fondness for the musical Cats. Between the ages of 13 and 18, she participated in a local jazz band and frequently performed alongside friends from that band, which brought her much joy. After completing her education at Blackstone High School, Vicki pursued further studies at an academy where she impressively earned 5 diplomas of higher education. However, and quite unexpectedly, her life took an entirely different path afterward. At 18 years old, an age characterized by both excitement and uncertainty, Vicki encountered significant problems after falling into bad company. Consequently, she became addicted to illegal substances, a situation that led her to work as a sex worker in order to finance this addiction. It is documented that she worked primarily in Cannon Park and Gresham areas of Middlesbrough near her hometown. In 1999, a challenging year for many reasons, Vicki found herself homeless and severely ill with pneumonia. During this difficult period, her friend introduced her to Patch Claus, who generously offered temporary shelter so she could recover properly. She stayed with him for several months, during which time he cared for her diligently, providing necessary medications as well as support services aimed at aiding recuperation efforts. Unfortunately, even such thoughtful assistance couldn't curb or change Vicki's ongoing addiction or alter what had become an increasingly destructive lifestyle up until that point. On Saturday, September 23, 2000, just a few days following her 21st birthday, Vicki and her friend departed from Patch Claus's residence around noon. Vicky was observed in the vicinity of Cannon Park in Gresham, where, according to some accounts, she was accompanying a client. Later that day, she met with another client on Set Road in Middlesbrough. Together, they proceeded to Main Road, an address recognized for activities involving illegal substances and escort services. After spending some time at this location, Vicky and her client exited the premises and hailed a taxi on the street close to Union Street. The taxi transported them to the man's home in Norton, approximately 3 miles away from their starting point. Vicky stayed briefly at this residence before calling another taxi to return to Middlesbrough. She consistently utilized the same taxi company's services. A white Vauxhall Vectra with registration number 790 arrived to pick her up at 4 a.m. on Sunday, September 24th. Vicky disembarked from the taxi around 4:20 a.m. at the intersection of Union Street and Ashwood Square, next to a pub known as Colleague. From there, it was only about a 5-minute walk to Patch Claus's house where she resided. However, she never reached home that night. The man who had been expecting her began worrying when she did not return and started contacting friends and visiting known hangouts, but without success. 3 days later, on September 27th, he contacted law enforcement authorities, which initiated an investigation into her disappearance. The subsequent week, on October 5th, the Northern Echo published an article headlined, "Disappearance of a Young Woman." In this piece, Vicky was described as being 5'3", tall with blonde hair tied back in a ponytail and speaking the local language fluently. She had been last seen wearing a white t-shirt paired with light gray trousers and white sneakers. The article also included comments from police officials noting that Vicky was known locally as a sex worker. The article reported that authorities and police were deeply concerned for her safety, but did not link Vicky's disappearance to the murder of another sex worker, Kelly Mason, who was found strangled in the same vicinity. Though Kelly and Vicky both engaged in the escort business and struggled with illegal substances, their cases were not connected. A man named Sean Thu received a life sentence for Kelly Mason's murder. However, he was not tied to Vicky's vanishing. In the early hours of November 2000, a local resident stumbled upon decomposing remains of a young woman on the outskirts of a village in Yorkshire, North England. These remains belonged to a 21-year-old woman who had gone missing 6 weeks prior from Middlesbrough, approximately 20 miles away. Subsequent years involved investigations into numerous brutal crimes. Vicky's family remained resolute in uncovering those responsible. In 2018, additional funds were allocated to assist police efforts in finding the perpetrator. On Friday, November 3rd at around 6 a.m., while walking his dog in Demi, a village situated about 20 miles southeast of Middlesbrough, a local resident discovered severely decomposed body parts of an unclothed female near a roadside ditch running through the village center. Police soon arrived at the scene and identified the victim as Vicky Glass, aged 21 and recently reported missing. The cause of death wasn't determined immediately. North Yorkshire and Cleveland police promptly initiated an investigation involving a team of 40 officers examining evidence through forensic examinations and documenting information regarding Vicky's last activities. Unfortunately, no clues surfaced at the site itself, nor were any articles of clothing found that she had been wearing last. Detective Brian Dan led this investigation effort and requested journalists reach out to anyone familiar with or having communicated with Vicky if they possessed helpful information. Given Demi's status as a well-known tourist destination, appeals specifically targeted visitors potentially present during relevant time span. Authorities urged residents to observe if any vehicles might have paused along roadsides before entering Demi, possibly linked to how Vicky was transported. On November 13, 2000, Vicky's mother, Deborah, addressed the media to urge witnesses to step forward with any information they might have. The following week, photographs of Vicky were displayed in the pub where she was last seen and in other city areas frequented by sex workers. By November 20th, police had questioned over 500 individuals and received 150 testimonies. Among these were former clients of Vicky and drivers from the Cannon Park overnight parking lot, a known spot for sex workers like her. A few days later, detectives expressed disappointment to local journalists regarding the public's limited response, especially after Deborah's heartfelt plea. On November 3rd, another police petition noted that numerous witnesses had come forward after investigators reviewed more than 70 hours of surveillance tape from Middlesbrough city center. It was reported that no substantial info had been received from these appeals. The police hadn't confirmed contact with all witnesses either. As Christmas approached, Tony Glass, Vicky's father, and Colin Goodale, her stepfather, visited the site where her body was found and placed flowers on her grave. They made another plea for residents to provide any useful information to help catch the culprit. Holding back tears, both men urged people not to hide what they knew and immediately contact authorities. Deborah was too distraught to attend the ceremony, but continued hoping for leads on her daughter's disappearance. Investigations extended into the next year. Police indicated that about a dozen sex workers potentially held crucial info regarding Vicky's case. In March of that same year, law enforcement intensified monitoring of truck drivers stopping at Cannon Park's parking area, subsequently arresting a 39-year-old man from Grimsby, who remained anonymous and released on bail. Efforts persisted as detectives examined transportation documents aiming to trace truckers present in Middlesbrough during the relevant weekend window. Detective Brian Dan disclosed they were able to analyze records from more than 100 companies while interviewing all identified former partners and clients of Vicky, information obtained via other sex workers' accounts. One prominent suspect emerged, a stocky male around age 34 to 38, possessing a mole on his left cheek with thick blonde or graying hair, reportedly involved in transporting household goods such as washing powder and washing machines. The investigation carried on through Sunday morning of September 24th, just past Vicky's disappearance date in September, leaving everyone determined, but still searching for concrete answers. Witnesses observed him exiting the truck. Additionally, on the evening of September 23rd, he gave $10 to Vicky, but kept her with her belongings as a guarantee that she would come back for them. On January 9, 2002, police apprehended a 47-year-old man suspected of being involved in Vicky's murder. The identity of this individual was initially withheld from the public. However, 2 days after his arrest, on January 11th, it was revealed that his name was Eric Coates. He resided in southern North Yorkshire, approximately 45 miles south of Middlesbrough. Despite these developments, Coates was released without any charges being filed against him. This marked the third occasion Mr. Coates had been interrogated concerning Vicky's disappearance. During an extensive search of his residence, where he lived with his parents, the authorities seized clothes, diaries, videotapes, and a car. All these items were subsequently confiscated by the police. Several properties in Scarborough, a coastal town about 50 miles southeast of Middlesbrough, belonging to Coates's father Raymond, were also subject to searches by law enforcement officials. Police reported that Mr. Coates could not provide an alibi for his whereabouts on the day Vicky vanished, though he claimed he likely remained at home since it was his father's birthday. Later on, Mr. Coates gave an interview to the Northern Echo newspaper, where he suggested that Vicky died amid conflicts with illicit substance dealers and asserted that he had been wrongfully branded a liar because he couldn't remember details clearly. It emerged that Mr. Coates often availed himself of services provided by sex workers and had previously been a client of Vicky's too. In addition to denying involvement in her death due to any debts related to illegal substances, as rumored, he stated emphatically that such a violent end shouldn't befall anyone, and voiced hopefulness about justice eventually being served through finding the true perpetrators. In April 2002, the police informed Mr. Coates that they were not going to charge him in connection with Vicky's murder. The Northern Echo interviewed him, and he expressed a desire to return to normalcy. While police will refrain from publicly linking him to Vicky's case again, it is important to note his previous convictions. In 1994, Eric Coates was jailed for 15 months after being convicted by Teesside Court for kidnapping and assaulting a sex worker in Middlesbrough. Additionally, he was acquitted of attempted abuse and indecent assault on the same woman. In June 2006, Eric Coates received a 14-year prison sentence after pleading guilty to committing 15 intimate crimes against girls aged 11 to 14 and a single mother of 3 children. At the same time, Eric's father, Raymond Coates, then in his 70s, was charged with 12 counts of sexual harassment, but was deemed too sick to stand trial. Raymond has neither been officially acquitted nor convicted of any crimes up until now. This marked the second occasion on which Raymond had been excused from standing trial for serious charges involving one of his sons. In 2003, Philip Nigel Coates received a jail sentence of 13 years after being found guilty of 3 charges related to coercing a woman into an intimate relationship with his father, attempted brokerage, which is just baffling, and inciting her to commit severe intimate acts involving animals. Despite claims regarding his health conditions, Raymond Coates resided in North Yorkshire until he passed away in 2015. Information about his sons remains shielded from public scrutiny at present. Following Eric Coates' exoneration in July 2002 from all charges related to Vicky's case, Cleveland police announced their intention to question John Taylor, a man sentenced to life imprisonment for the kidnapping and murder of Leanne Tiernan in Leeds, West Yorkshire. The divorced father of 2 had kidnapped Tiernan while she shopped downtown on Christmas Eve in December 2000 and subsequently strangled her at his residence. Her body was discovered 9 months later by Inspector Jim Tate of Cleveland Police, who stated that they would closely monitor developments pertaining John Taylor, yet no further announcements linked him with Vicky's case subsequently emerged. In September 2002, Vicky's mother Deborah once again appealed to the media for information in connection with the 2nd anniversary of her daughter's death. During her speech, she said that she thought about taking her own life because of the unbearable pain she has to endure. The investigation into Vicky's case slowed down until the following year when a 2nd investigation began. Back in August 2003, the forensic expert who conducted the autopsy on Vicky's body stated he couldn't determine the cause of death. The main issue? Her body had decomposed significantly, and many parts were missing, including vital and several bones. It was established there were no signs of injuries nor any indication that Vicky had been mistreated. Warren Michael Oakley issued an open verdict, with news agencies quoting him, "We don't know how she ended up where she was found, we don't know the cause of death, and we don't know if anyone was involved in her death." Later that year, Vicky's mother Deborah and stepfather Colin went to Demi, where her body was discovered, to lay flowers. Reporters from ITV Channel joined them and filmed a brief 20-second video. In it, Deborah appeared visibly distressed as she mentioned how unjust it felt for Vicky to die this way, and spoke about her daughter's declining happiness after encountering substance issues. Sadly, without major breakthroughs in the investigation, people began to forget about the case. In November 2004, though, Detective Brian Dan assured everyone that the investigation wasn't closing. Efforts would continue. Fast forward to December 2006, Cleveland police informed media outlets they intended to collaborate with Suffolk police regarding possible connections between Vicky's disappearance and the deaths of 5 sex workers near a town just south of Middlesbrough. Those victims were all discovered within 2 weeks, starting October 30th that year. 2 had been strangled, while causes for others remained undetermined. By December 21st came an arrest. Stephen Gerald James Wright was taken into custody on December 19th and charged with all 5 murders. Dubbed the Suffolk Strangler, Wright faced trial and in February 2008 received a life sentence without parole after being found guilty on all counts. In the days following the sentencing, various newspapers reported that Cleveland police would keep investigating Stephen Wright in connection with Vicky. This was despite the distance between the crime scenes and where Vicky was found. It's worth noting that Wright, a trucker, caught Cleveland police's interest since they had previously appealed to truck drivers and transportation companies many times. However, no further claims emerged linking Wright to Vicky's case. On September 24, 2010, marking the 10th anniversary of Vicky's death, her parents were scheduled to speak to reporters about their emotional turmoil from a decade-long search for justice. Her mother, Deborah, expressed that she thinks about Vicky daily and struggles with this loss. Tony, her father, revealed he lost his job and could no longer walk around alone or focus on anything. Gordon Lamp from Cleveland Police mentioned that despite 10 years passing without any significant discoveries, they remain committed to finding the criminal. Despite new requests for information, nothing new has come in. In December 2010, Vicky's case was linked to other crimes by Stephen Griffiths, known as the Crossbow Cannibal. Arrested on May 24, 2010 for murdering 3 sex workers in Bradford, capturing worldwide attention, Griffiths admitted his guilt and received life imprisonment without parole for these crimes. Reports indicated he consumed parts of his victims' bodies and disposed of other remains in garbage bags thrown into a lake. After pleading guilty in December 2010 and receiving life sentences for multiple murders before his arrest, as well as several additional offenses, police examined Griffiths' activities since age 14 to possibly connect him with other unsolved crimes. By January 2011, though it became clear Griffiths didn't kill Vicky, according to police confirmation. As time went on, except annual appeals around each anniversary, the media started covering this case less frequently, regrettably, until sadly, when Deborah passed away at age 55, unsure how her daughter's life ended or who bore responsibility was. In 2017, the Cleveland Police, along with Crime Commissioner Barry Coppinger, sought a special grant from the Department of Home Affairs to fund investigations into 3 cold cases, including Vicky Glass's. These cases also involved 2 young women from Middlesbrough. One of them was 17-year-old Donna Mary Keogh, who went missing in May 1998. She had last been seen in Middlesbrough a month earlier. Even though no body was found, it is believed she was murdered. In 2015, Deputy Chief Constable Ian Spence of Cleveland Police apologized to Donna's family for shortcomings in the original investigation. However, only a year later, October 17, 2016, after an independent review of Donna's case, Cleveland Police began investigating her disappearance and suspected murder again. Despite a 20-year inquiry, no one has ever been charged with Donna Mary Keogh's murder. The third case for which Cleveland Police sought extra funding concerned the murder of Rachel Wilson in 2002 at age 19. She was last seen on May 31st of that year and, like Vicky Glass, had unfortunately resorted to sex work due to severe addiction issues. On June 27, 2012, parts of Rachel's body were discovered on a farm near Colby in Middlesbrough. By April 2018, Cleveland Police had secured the requested grant funds, and Barry Coppinger remarked that he always thinks about families who are left without answers regarding their loved ones' deaths when dealing with such cases. The grant amounted to nearly £4 million and significantly aided these unsolved crime investigations. Assistant Chief Constable Jason Harwin mentioned that similarities exist among the victims' ages and where they disappeared from, but noted it was too early then to declare any definitive links between the cases. These crimes remain unsolved. Do you recall Vicky Glass's story? Her disappearance marked its beginning. However, why she was killed still poses questions today. Now there's a notable new suspect, Christopher Halliwell. This individual already has 2 murders attributed to him, Cyan O'Callaghan and Becky Godden Edwards being his known victims, and could be connected to Vicky's vanishing as well. It's like something out of horror flicks, but it's all too real. In October 2018, the North York's Inquirer news site featured an extensive article suggesting that another well-known convicted criminal might be linked to Vicky's disappearance. This individual is also considered a suspect in 2 other unsolved cases. The article was part of a broader series about the potential victims of Christopher Halliwell, a former taxi driver from Swindon, responsible for two significant crimes. One of Halliwell's victims was Sian O'Callaghan, a 22-year-old office worker. She went missing during a night out with friends in Swindon in March 2011. After bidding farewell to her friends, she got into a taxi and was subsequently killed by Halliwell. Police were led to Halliwell through surveillance camera footage. He was arrested shortly thereafter and eventually directed police to her burial site. Her body was found in a shallow grave in Oxfordshire. Following this discovery, Halliwell confessed to another murder committed 8 years earlier. He provided detectives with information on where they could locate the body of Becky Godden Edwards. Becky had last been seen alive getting into a taxi outside a nightclub in Swindon in January 2003. Halliwell later stabbed her multiple times and then strangled her. The North Yorks and Queer News piece underscored concerns that Halliwell may be connected to additional unsolved disappearances beyond those already attributed to him. Such reports contribute valuable information, both direct evidence and investigative leads, for ongoing efforts aiming at resolving these troubling cases. In October 2012, Halliwell pleaded guilty to the murder of Sian O'Callaghan and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 25. However, since Halliwell wasn't allowed to speak with his lawyer before confessing to the murder, the judge found the case inadmissible. Consequently, all charges were dropped. New evidence came to light in 2001, indicating that Halliwell had been previously found guilty of Becky's murder. It is widely believed that Christopher Halliwell is responsible for numerous crimes. The article concludes that all three women from unsolved cases align with Halliwell's victim preference. Furthermore, both Rachel Wilson and Vicky Glass were sex workers, and Halliwell utilized their services. Perhaps because of this connection, he worked as a taxi driver in Middlesbrough's center. Halliwell traveled across the country, seeking work as a construction worker and taxi driver. He resided in various cities. His father presumably lived around York. Middlesbrough was about an hour's drive from York via the A19 highway. Halliwell had a keen interest in fishing and traveled extensively for it. The River Tees offers numerous excellent fishing spots, including the Staunch, near where Vicky Glass's body was discovered. Fishing would provide an appropriate excuse for him to frequent the area and commit crimes. There is no information online suggesting that police have officially linked Halliwell to Vicky's case. In 2021, Cleveland police closed one of 3 unsolved cases after a 62-year-old man confessed to Rachel Wilson's manslaughter. Kate Hall introduced Rachel to illegal substances shortly after they met when she was 15 years old and then coerced her into escort work to finance their addiction together. He had been under police investigation for several years and had carried a lock of Rachel's hair in his wallet throughout that time. Ultimately, he received an 18-and-a-half-year prison sentence. Presently, Vicky's death remains unexplained, a source of unbearable pain for her family and friends, who continue searching tirelessly for answers, though they remain elusive thus far. Her loved ones are deeply distressed by what befell their dear Vicky. We can only hope that one day they will find peace and truth shall finally prevail. Today we're going to find out more about another horrible case with you. The case of Marcos Matsunaga. In 2012, the family of one of Brazil's wealthiest individuals, businessman Marcos Matsunaga, found itself in the spotlight after Marcos vanished on the eve of a major billion-dollar deal. The case shocked the entire nation, and photos of the inconsolable widow of the millionaire dominated the front pages of leading national publications. Initially, police suspected competitors might have kidnapped or harmed Marcos to disrupt the upcoming deal. However, the truth that emerged proved to be far more cruel and horrifying, an account of cold-blooded murder and an egregious cover-up that inspired several documentaries. Marcos Matsunaga was not just a successful entrepreneur, but also one of Brazil's richest people. He managed a family business producing various food products under the brand Yoki. This company had been founded by Marcos's grandfather, Yoshizo Kitano, who had immigrated from across the ocean. The brand name Yoki originated from combining parts of Yoshizo's surname and first name. The foundation for this future business empire was laid in the middle of the last century. What began as a small flour milling enterprise not only survived years of crisis and war, but thrived, eventually transforming into a massive company with a global reputation and an extensive product range. Born into affluence, Marcos never had to want for anything. He inherited an already thriving business created by his grandfather and father. As CEO of his family's food company, he was poised to become his family's first billionaire, a goal he pursued almost throughout his entire conscious life. Unfortunately, these grand ambitions never came to fruition. People who knew Marcos personally often described him as a competent and quite talented businessman who succeeded in preserving and multiplying his family's capital many times over by increasing profits. Yet he was also known for being difficult, capricious, arrogant, with a heavy temperament and an incessant urge to control everyone around him. From childhood, he struggled with being overweight and had vision problems that necessitated wearing glasses. Additionally, he was short in stature and somewhat clumsy. These characteristics posed numerous challenges for him from an early age, primarily in his interactions with peers. He had almost no friends, and women generally avoided him due to his peculiar personality. Marcos found it difficult to establish long-term relationships. His attempts often did not progress beyond a few dates. Surprisingly, even his successful business and significant inheritance did not enhance his appeal as a bachelor. Many were put off by his arrogance and selfishness. Consequently, Marcos frequently resorted to hiring escorts for companionship. Little is known about his first wife. It appears the marriage did not stem from profound love or passion, but rather from pressure by his relatives and perhaps a sense of desperation on his part. Despite this, their marriage lasted several years, though both parties quickly regretted their decision to wed. Initially, the young wife endeavored to reconcile with Marcos's difficult character, hoping time would enable them to form a supportive and understanding partnership. However, this hope proved unfounded as they grew increasingly distant over the years. Furthermore, Marcos was unfaithful and made no effort to conceal or justify these actions. He predominantly sought mistresses through online platforms where women offered intimacy for money. One of these women was Alice. She was a striking blonde with an attractive figure and 6 years younger than him. Alice's background was significantly different from Marcos's. She came from an impoverished and unstable family, living in one of the city's most crime-ridden neighborhoods. Despite their differences in circumstances, Marcos began inviting Alice on regular dates, compensating her handsomely for her time and company. Alice never knew her father. Her mother was an alcoholic. Consequently, Alice's childhood was tough and lacking in joy. From a very young age, she faced regular beatings, harassment, and abuse from her mother's roommates. She barely finished school and eventually ran away from home, leaving the neighborhood where she grew up behind. She enrolled in nursing courses and landed a job at a hospital. However, she quickly realized that caring for terminally ill patients was not the best fit for her. The sensitive and vulnerable young woman often got attached to people, perceiving each patient's death as a personal tragedy. A few years later, Alice decided to pursue higher education and completely change her career path. She chose law, seeing it as a promising field that would open many doors for her future. She diligently prepared for admission and scored the needed points in the entrance exams. But despite all this effort, paying for her studies on her nurse's salary was impossible. With no family support, having severed ties with her relatives upon leaving home, Alice faced significant financial challenges. Consequently, the young and attractive Alice decided to capitalize on her looks by registering on a site specializing in services. With assistance from the site, she created a compelling personal profile. Soon enough, wealthy men began showing interest in the young blonde beauty. Providing intimate services provided Alice with a good income, allowing her to pay for her education and support herself fully. She planned to exit this line of work once she secured her law degree and obtained employment in her chosen field. During this period of transition, Alice met Marcos, who became one of her regular clients. Despite the path she took to achieve her goals, Alice remained focused on securing a professional career and improving her circumstances through determination and hard work. He was very generous with gifts and met regularly with Alice without hiding it from anyone. She knew that the businessman was married, but she never imagined one of the richest men in the country would leave his wife for her. The story Alice Matsunaga is like a Cinderella tale. A poor girl from a disadvantaged family engaged in providing services meets a multimillionaire who soon falls deeply in love with her. Marcos lost his composure, though it's unclear if Alice influenced this outcome. After about 6 months, Marcos realized he wanted more than just to date his young mistress. He wanted to be with her permanently. Without hesitation or regret, he filed for divorce from his first wife and introduced Alice as his fiancée to everyone. For obvious reasons, the businessman did not want anyone to know how they met or what she did for a living. Therefore, the couple concocted a simple story of a casual meeting in a cafe and stuck to this version. Even Marcos's closest relatives and few friends were unaware of the true circumstances. However, Alice did not receive a warm welcome from the Matsunaga family. The entrepreneur's parents suspected that this attractive young woman used all her charm to captivate the wealthy but unattractive Marcos and was now pretending not to notice his difficult character traits. Nonetheless, when Marcos announced his intention to divorce and marry Alice, no one strongly objected. The businessman arranged an extravagant wedding in the traditional style, white dress, numerous guests, and an enormous tiered cake. He subsequently moved his new wife into his vast and luxurious mansion, where she became its full-fledged mistress. Marcos Matsunaga had long been known as an avid collector of expensive wines and rare weapons. He constructed a huge cellar in his house specifically for wines, where bottles were meticulously sorted by year and country. Additionally, there was a secret room for weapons, displaying firearms and edged weapons on walls from floor to ceiling. Marcos took immense pride in these collections and was constantly engaged in their replenishment. His house was filled to the brim with luxury items and modern art. These pieces were hung on the walls and placed on every imaginable surface. Shortly after their wedding, the couple decided they were ready for an heir. Despite their best efforts, Alice couldn't get pregnant naturally for a while. They opted for in vitro fertilization, but success didn't come quickly. When their daughter was finally born, the couple's joy knew no bounds. The young parents focused on raising their long-awaited baby girl and made future plans. As she grew older, the family traveled extensively, immersing themselves in various cultures and traditions. Their daughter, treated like a little princess, experienced love, care, and luxury. However, the couple shared one very specific hobby: hunting large animals. This hobby originally belonged to Marcos, who attempted to involve his previous partners in it without much success. Marcos had almost given up hope of finding someone who would share his passion until Alice came along. Many believe Alice took up hunting partly to win more favor with Marcos and capture his heart. They started by visiting shooting ranges where Alice learned to handle different firearms. Subsequently, they ventured into the woods together to hunt wild animals. Alice felt no remorse when she killed animals. She saw it as a competition. You either succeed or you don't. Marcos appreciated this attitude and enjoyed watching his wife skillfully handle her weapons and stalk her prey. He also taught her how to skin and butcher wild boars, deer, and other forest creatures using large knives, special cleavers, and axes. Interestingly enough, the family didn't have conventional pets like cats or dogs. Instead, they kept poisonous snakes in specially built terrariums that closely mimicked their natural habitats. In the spring of 2012, the entrepreneur was gearing up to make perhaps the most significant deal of his life and career, which would elevate his income considerably. He was in ongoing negotiations with several business partners to sell the family company. The proceeds from this transaction were intended to be invested in a highly profitable new venture. During this period, Marcos was rarely seen at home because he was entirely engrossed in work, and realizing his ambitious plans. He and Alice had moved into an upscale apartment complex situated in the business center of the city, close to his company's main office. Marcos spent most of his time away, leaving Alice often alone in the luxurious apartment with panoramic city views. His work schedule was extremely hectic, planned down to minute details. Meetings, consultations with specialists, and business discussions consumed him to the extent that he frequently didn't even come home for the night. Yet, he assured Alice that once this deal was finalized, their lives would be completely different. On May 19, 2012, just before closing on a billion-dollar deal, Marcos vanished without a trace. His wife reported it only the next day because she assumed he was at work. According to Alice, he had an evening meeting that might extend into late-night hours and another early morning appointment with a business partner. Therefore, he collected some essential items and mentioned that he would likely stay overnight at the office before heading straight to finalize the deal. When Marcos did not return home or answer his phone by the following day, Alice grew increasingly worried and informed law enforcement of his absence. The police quickly discovered that Marcos hadn't attended either his evening or morning meetings, appointments crucial enough for him not to miss under any circumstances. There was immediately a suspicion that the millionaire had been kidnapped, and most his family would receive ransom demands soon after. However, 24 hours passed, then another day, and still no ransom demands were received. Hopes that Matsunaga was still alive were diminishing rapidly. Investigators began to question the relatives, friends, and business partners of the businessman. Their goal was to determine if he had any enemies or if anyone might benefit from his disappearance or the disruption of an upcoming deal. Despite their efforts, they could not identify any specific individuals or groups who would have wished harm upon the businessman. Matsunaga managed his business effectively and made strategic decisions that almost always benefited everyone involved. A few days later, Alice took her little daughter and went to her father-in-law and mother-in-law's home. She had something she hadn't dared to share with the police. The young woman, with tears streaming down her face, revealed that her husband had been cheating on her for quite some time with a woman named Natasha Villa Lima. Marcos did not hide this affair, even after significant arguments and threats of divorce. He promised to leave his mistress for the sake of their family, but continued to meet Natasha discreetly to avoid provoking another scandal. Realizing this, Alice decided to hire a private detective to gather evidence of Marcos's infidelity. She ended up with photographs and videos showing her husband on romantic dates with Natasha. Notably, he took his new girlfriend to the same restaurants and entertainment venues he used to frequent with Alice. It seemed Marcos wanted to show others how little he respected his wife by openly cheating on her. As it later emerged, Marcos met Natasha Lima through an escort service site where he once met Alice. They had been seeing each other for about 5 months, during which time he gifted her an expensive car and paid a substantial amount of money for Natasha to remove her profile from the site. Alice presented these incriminating photos and videos, proving her husband's infidelity to Marcos's parents. She also mentioned that she had shown everything to Marcos the day before he disappeared. Instead of making excuses and asking for forgiveness, he simply packed his things, told his wife he was leaving her, and then left there without a trace. Based on Alice's story, it seemed her husband, overtaken by passion, decided to run away with a new mistress. However, everyone who knew Matsunaga unanimously agreed that he couldn't just abandon the business and disappear. He was too dedicated to the company that had been built by his family over decades. Answers to many questions surfaced about a week later. In a deserted area approximately 50 kilometers from the businessman's home, a passerby found scattered garbage bags containing human remains. The man immediately reported the gruesome discovery to the police, and it soon became evident that the victim was Marcos Matsunaga. Experts determined that the businessman had been killed by a shot to the head. Subsequently, his body was dismembered, packed into garbage bags, and taken to the city's outskirts. Notably, pathologists indicated that the murderer was likely either a surgeon or an experienced butcher skilled with a carving knife. This conclusion stemmed from how accurately and professionally the cuts were made in specific areas to separate body parts. At the early stages of the investigation, there were no concrete leads. Hence, it was decided to start probing from where Marcos was last seen alive, an elite residential complex where he lived with his wife and daughter. This complex numerous video surveillance cameras whose footage began to be examined meticulously. It turned out that, on the evening before his disappearance, Marcos and Alice ordered food delivery at home. The elevator camera recordings showed Marcos going down to the first floor and returning with boxes of pizza in hand. Upon entering his apartment, he never emerged again, not that evening, nor at night, or even the next day. It seemed as though Matsunaga vanished within his own home without leaving any clues behind. But in the morning, his wife leaves their apartment with 3 large wheeled suitcases. Footage reveals these suitcases are quite heavy, and she moves them with great difficulty. Investigators had already suspected what kind of luggage it was. On the same day, the businessman's widow was taken into custody and brought to the police station questioning. Initially, she denied everything and adhered to the initial claim that her husband had left her for a mistress. However, when shown the elevator footage, she broke down in tears and began to speak. According to Alice, their family life had deteriorated significantly. The man she once idolized no longer existed. He humiliated her constantly, reproached her work in the escort service, claiming he had rescued her from destitution. Moreover, he accused her of being a poor mother to their daughter. He tried controlling her every move and didn't allow her to make friends. When Alice once broached the subject of divorce, Marcos laughed and said he would leave her with nothing, take their child, and forbid any contact. On that fateful evening, Alice confronted her husband with pictures from a detective showing him with his mistress. This incensed him further. He struck his wife, and then, according to Alice, everything became a blur. She does not remember how to possession of a gun and shot her husband. Realizing what had transpired later on, she decided to dispose of his body to make it appear as if he had disappeared without a trace. Alice's experience as a nurse made her familiar with human anatomy. Her husband had also taught her how to skin and cut up animal carcasses. They had the necessary tools at home for this purpose. What followed was simply a matter of technique. While dismembering and bagging her husband's body, their young daughter slept peacefully in the next room. From the outset, Alice's testimony raised numerous doubts and questions. Additionally, it became evident that the pictures and videos proving Marcos's infidelity were obtained from a private detective's hands. On May 20th, after she had killed her husband, Alice took photos and videos to the parents of the businessman. She claimed that Marcos had abandoned her by running away with his mistress. We also managed to locate Natasha Lima, who appeared in court as a witness. According to her, Marcos himself wanted a divorce, but was frankly afraid of his wife, saying she was mentally unstable and capable of terrible things. The last time Natasha saw her lover, which was the day before his disappearance, he complained about the constant scandals in the family. He mentioned that after selling the company, he planned to move to Florida to start a new business. Taking Alice with him was not part of his plans. He intended to divorce her and forget about her like a terrible dream. Another awful discovery was made by experts who found blood in Marcos's lungs. This indicated that he was still alive and trying to breathe when his wife separated his head from his body. This is both wild and horrifying. Alice herself vehemently denied this, insisting that he died instantly from a bullet wound. The pathologist also noted that the bullet entered Marcos's head at an odd angle, as if he were sitting or lying down and not expecting to be attacked. He didn't even try to defend himself or dodge the shot. This contradicted Alice's account of being attacked by her husband and trying to defend herself. Additionally, almost all witnesses who testified at the trial denied that Matsunaga could have hit his wife. Yes, he had a difficult character and could say hurtful words, but he never raised a hand on anyone in his life. Everything pointed towards Alice fabricating this episode, since Marcos could not refute anything. As a result, the court found Alice guilty of premeditated murder with particular cruelty and attempting to conceal the crime. Alice Matsunaga was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a punishment many considered extremely lenient for such a crime. The parents of the deceased man are now responsible for raising their daughter. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Jessica Paget. Jessica Paget was born on December 15, 1980, and spent her entire life in Pennsylvania. As a child, she was energetic and cheerful. Her parents, Thomas and Danelle, got divorced when she was still young. Her mother remarried soon after, and Jessica came to regard her stepfather as a second parent. After graduating high school in 1998, Jessica pursued higher education in preschool education. It was during this time that she met Michael Padet, and the two started dating and eventually living together. Over the course of their 8-year relationship, they had 2 children together. The couple finally tied the knot in August 2014, and some sources suggest that Michael also had a child from a previous relationship. Michael proved to be a loving father and husband, but like any family, they faced their share of challenges. Jessica was generally happy in her marriage to Michael, but tragedy struck just 4 months after their wedding, when she mysteriously disappeared. During a 2-year period, Jessica worked at a kindergarten in Northampton, a job she loved because she was great with children and could easily connect with them. The feeling was mutual, as the kids adored Jessica and looked forward to spending time with her. On November 21, 2014, Jessica took her older kids to school and then headed to work with her younger son, who attended the same kindergarten where she was employed. It seemed like a typical day, with no indication of any problems. At lunchtime, Jessica asked the administrator if she could take a short break to send a fax from her mother and stepfather's house, which was located in a rural area near Northampton. The administrator granted her request. Jessica drove to her mother's house, leaving her son at the kindergarten. She promised to return within 30 minutes. However, an hour passed, and Jessica failed to return. Her colleagues grew concerned and started calling her, but she didn't answer. An hour later, the kindergarten administrator contacted Jessica's husband, Michael, to ask if he knew where she might be, as she had left work but never returned. Michael said he was at work and had no idea where his wife was. He promised to try to contact her himself. Michael immediately started calling Jessica, but all his calls went straight to voicemail. This was unusual, as Jessica always answered calls from her family. Michael decided to contact his mother-in-law, Danelle Bittner, who was in Florida, to ask if Jessica had reached out to her. Danelle had not heard from Jessica that day and was worried, knowing it was out of character for her daughter to ignore calls. Danelle advised Michael to call her husband, Greg, Jessica's stepfather, to ask if he had any information. However, as it turned out, Greg had not seen or spoken to Jessica that day. 2 hours after Michael reported his wife Jessica missing, police tracked her phone signal, which indicated it was approximately 1 mile from the kindergarten where she worked. Although the data wasn't entirely accurate due to inherent location errors, it gave police a general area to search. By the time they started their search, it was already dark outside. They soon found a white Subaru Outback in one of the parking lots, Jessica's car. The car was unlocked and empty, with Jessica's purse containing documents and bank cards on the seats. The keys were still in the ignition, and her phone lay nearby on the passenger seat. Initially, there were no signs of a crime or struggle in the car. However, the police were left with some pressing questions. Where was Jessica, and what had caused her to abandon her car and valuables so close to her workplace? The police required CCTV footage to clarify the events surrounding Jessica's disappearance. A camera on the back wall of a store across the street from where Jessica's car was found captured the scene. The police requested the store manager to provide them with the recordings. Upon reviewing the footage, they saw Jessica driving into the parking lot at around 1 p.m., exiting her car and standing by the driver's door for a period. Subsequently, she walked away and did not return. The investigators were perplexed by Jessica's decision to leave behind her documents, phone, and keys. Did she voluntarily go into hiding? The footage showed Jessica walking between two buildings towards another parking lot, but her disappearance remained unexplained due to the lack of cameras in that area. In the store, investigators reviewed the recording on a small, outdated monitor, so they decided to make a copy of the video to analyze it further on a larger, modern screen at the station. The Northampton Police Department, being a small force, reached out to the Pennsylvania State Police for assistance in organizing a search. Flyers featuring Jessica's image were distributed throughout Northampton and neighboring cities, as well as through the media and social networks. State police detectives worked to reconstruct the timeline of events leading up to Jessica's disappearance. They began by re-interviewing the kindergarten staff. After learning that Jessica had left work to send a fax from her mother's house, the detectives visited the house, hoping to find answers. The house, located about 4 miles from the kindergarten, was a 10-minute drive away. When they arrived, the detectives spoke with Donnell and her husband Greg, from whom they learned that Jessica had keys to the house and could come and go as she pleased. On the day of her disappearance, Donnell was in Florida, and Greg was not at home either. Although every sent fax is recorded in the device's usage history, it turned out that Greg's fax machine was faulty. Therefore, it was unclear whether Jessica had been at her mother's house that day. Perhaps she had chosen to use a different fax machine. However, this did not explain why she had left her belongings in her car. Next, the detectives decided to interview Jessica's husband, Michael, to get his alibi for the day of her disappearance. He claimed that he left the house first, with a friend driving him to work. The detectives verified his statement, aware that in many cases, husbands are involved in their wives' disappearances or deaths. Meanwhile, a search party was organized, and the media appealed to the public for any information, asking witnesses to contact the police. 2 days after Jessica's disappearance, the investigation had stalled, with no new leads. To verify her intended destination, the detectives searched for surveillance cameras along her supposed route to her mother's house. There was only one road leading to her mother's house, and nearby was an Exxon gas station, equipped with surveillance cameras. If Jessica had indeed been heading to her mother's house, she should have appeared on the gas station's surveillance footage. While reviewing the video footage, the detective spotted Jessica's car driving into view around 12:56 p.m. Given the short distance between the gas station and her mother's house, it was likely she'd need to drive back soon, since the fax machine at her mother's house was out of order. The detective then scanned the recording to see if the car had turned around and headed in the opposite direction. What caught their attention was that the car reappeared in the footage just 14 minutes later. This time, the white car sped through the gas station and headed in the direction where the police would later find it. Jessica's driving seemed peculiar. Instead of driving straight, she turned into the gas station and then onto the road on the other side without stopping. Afterwards, she drove to the city center and left her car in a parking lot. The only logical explanation for this unusual driving route was that Jessica was in a hurry and encountered a red traffic light at the intersection. By driving through the gas station, she managed to avoid the red light and continue driving on a road with a green light. Eventually, she left the car in the parking lot, where it was later found by the police. Upon reviewing the footage of Jessica exiting the car, the investigators noticed something they'd previously overlooked. Although Jessica was 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 130 pounds, the person getting out of the car was significantly taller and heavier. Based on the height of Jessica's car, experts estimated the person's height to be between 5 feet 11 inches and 6 feet 3 inches. While inspecting the abandoned car, police found the driver's seat was pushed all the way forward, making it uncomfortable for anyone over 5 feet 11 in tall to sit behind the wheel. This suggested the driver was trying to mislead police into thinking it was Jessica behind the wheel. But who was this tall person trying to frame her? The prime suspect was Michael, who stood around 6 feet tall. Police brought him in for questioning, and he maintained he had nothing to do with his wife's disappearance, claiming he was at work when the kindergarten called him. Detectives investigated Michael's alibi by interviewing his colleagues and tracking his phone's geolocation on the day of Jessica's disappearance. Their findings confirmed Michael was at work, ruling him out as the driver in the recording. This was the 4th day since Jessica vanished, leaving her children in a state of distress and uncertainty. The search continued, but unfortunately yielded no results. Upon re-examining the recording of someone exiting Jessica's car, investigators sought to identify the individual. For the second time, officers spotted something they had previously overlooked. 1 minute after the unknown person vanished behind the building, a white SUV, believed to be a Ford, departed from the location. Notably, Jessica's stepfather, Greg, matched the height description and owned a similar vehicle. The police invited Greg to the station for questioning. Greg was shocked to learn he was a suspect in his stepdaughter's disappearance. He claimed to have left his car at a repair service center, and on the day in question, a neighbor drove him there to collect his Ford. Afterwards, he visited the Exxon gas station to grab a bite to eat, coincidentally the same station that provided the CCTV footage to the police. However, Greg was unaware of this. After re-examining the recording, investigators observed him driving past the Exxon gas station 2 minutes after leaving the parking lot, indicating he didn't stop there for lunch as claimed. In fact, the evidence revealed that Greg had lied. But could the man Jessica referred to as her father have played a role in her disappearance? Following an interview with the man's neighbor, detectives discovered that Jessica did not drive him to the car service, as alleged. This meant that Greg's entire story was fabricated. By assembling all the facts, investigators deduced that Greg was at home when Jessica arrived to send the fax. It's possible that something occurred, prompting Greg to drive Jessica's car to the parking lot in the city center. A group of police officers visited the man's house, where Jessica's mother, Danelle, gave them permission to search the premises. During the search, one of the officers noticed the fax machine and discovered that Greg had lied about it being out of order. The device's usage history revealed that Jessica had indeed sent a fax from the house on the day she disappeared, confirming she was at her parents' residence at the time. In the basement, the officers found a trash can containing napkins with bloodstains. Furthermore, Greg's slippers, discovered in a dumpster on the street, had dried blood on them as well. Danelle mentioned that Greg had called the garbage company the previous day to request an early trash pickup, which seemed unusual since the trash can was not full. It appeared that Greg had likely disposed of evidence, including cleaning products and rags, in this manner. The police confronted Greg once again, informing him that they knew his previous statements were false and that they had found incriminating evidence in his house. They also revealed that they knew Jessica was in his house on the day she vanished. Faced with this new information, Greg began to talk. Gregory Graff, alias Greg, claimed that he returned home on the afternoon of November 21st to find Jessica's car in the driveway and bloodstains on the carpet. According to him, she was already deceased when he arrived. He stated that he panicked and was afraid to contact the police because he believed no one would believe him. Graff claimed to have driven Jessica's car to a parking lot in the city center and then returned home. He alleged that Jessica owed someone money, which led to her death. However, this story was just another fabrication by Gregory Graff. Detectives learned that the day before Jessica vanished, Graff purchased adult toys. Frustrated with Graff's evasives, they directly asked him where he had hidden his stepdaughter's body, pointing out that an autopsy would provide many answers. Graff realized he was caught and altered his story again. He claimed that on the day in question, he was at home watching adult videos when Jessica arrived to send a fax. He stated that she was using the computer while he stood behind her. Graff alleged that he became sexually aroused and desired his stepdaughter. Without speaking a word, he claimed he pulled out a gun and shot her in the back of the head. Then, he allegedly moved her body to the bedroom and drove her car to a parking lot in the city center. He mentioned that his Ford was parked near the car service where he had left it for repairs earlier. Therefore, he went there after getting out of Jessica's car, adjusting the seat to make it appear as though she was behind the wheel. Greg's next words stunned the investigators. He revealed that after returning home, he had set up a video camera near the bed and recorded himself with his stepdaughter. This statement was unsettling, especially since everyone knew Jessica was already deceased. The police later discovered this disturbing video on Greg's computer. According to Greg, he then wrapped Jessica's body in a blanket and concealed it in a nearby ravine, after which he returned home and began cleaning up. He also mentioned his family and parents, but never expressed remorse for Jessica's death. Donnell was forced to confront the devastating reality that her daughter was dead and that her husband was responsible for the tragedy. What Greg had done to Jessica's body was beyond Donnell's comprehension. Authorities charged 53-year-old Gregory Graff with the murder of Jessica Pedette. During the investigation, some theories emerged, suggesting that when Jessica arrived, Greg attempted to persuade her into a romantic encounter, but when she rejected him, he killed her out of fear of being exposed. However, this theory was difficult to prove, as Jessica's body showed no signs of defensive wounds. She died from a single wound to the back of the head, which was consistent with Greg's account. In the state of Pennsylvania, Greg could have faced the death penalty. However, since Jessica was already deceased when he committed the second part of his crime, the prosecutor's office could not pursue the death penalty. After examining Greg and Jessica's computers and phones, the police found no evidence of a connection between them beyond their stepfather-stepdaughter relationship. The trial began in 2015. District Attorney John Morganelli stated that Philadelphia lawyer John McMahon Jr. failed to submit the results of any mental health evaluation for Gregory Graff. McMahon claimed he had Graff evaluated for a possible insanity defense, but the evaluation showed no signs of diminished mental capacity, so he did not use it in the trial. At one of the court sessions, the jury had to watch a 6-minute video of Greg's heinous crimes. He used adult toys that he had bought the day before. The jury didn't want to watch the video, but the judge said they were obligated to do so before reaching a decision. Graff's lawyer tried to prove it wasn't a planned crime and that his client committed a crime of the third degree, not the first. Therefore, Northampton County District Attorney John Morganelli made the difficult decision to show the jury a 6-minute video recording filmed by Graff. After sentencing, the judge suggested that the jury consider seeking counseling from a psychologist to help them cope with the trial's emotional impact. Following the verdict, Jessica Pedette's husband, Michael, spoke about the struggle of moving forward without his wife, the only woman he ever loved, and the challenges of raising their 3 children without her. "She was the kindest person you'd ever meet," he told reporters, still grieving her loss. Donnell Bittner filed for divorce from Gregory Graff, but the process was complicated and required a court hearing. During the proceeding, 55-year-old Gregory Graff, who appeared via video feed from his Pennsylvania prison cell, refused to sign documents that would grant him 25% of the shared assets with Donnell Bittner. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Suzanne Morphew. Suzanne Morphew was born on April 11, 1971, to Jean and Adrian Alexandria, and grew up with 2 brothers, David and Andrew. Those who knew Suzanne described her as an amazing intellectual and thoughtful friend. In 1998, while in high school, Suzanne met her future husband, Barry Morphew, and they married 6 years later. Barry was a talented baseball player and was signed with the Toronto Blue Jays, while Suzanne pursued a degree in education at Purdue University. However, Barry's sports career was cut short due to a serious injury, and he went on to start a career in horticulture. Suzanne had been teaching for 4 years when Barry launched his landscape company, which gradually gained success over time. The couple had 2 children, Mallory and Macy. They seemed to have a picture-perfect life in Indiana until Suzanne was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. She bravely fought and beat cancer twice. In 2018, the Morphews moved to Mayville, Colorado for a fresh start and to be closer to their daughter Mallory, who was attending Western State University. They settled into a beautiful 7-acre property where Barry could hunt and continued to work as a contractor. He also volunteered as a fireman, while Suzanne retired from teaching and devoted herself to the church and took up sports. She had recently developed a passion for mountain biking. From the outside, the Morphews appeared to be the perfect family, but they had their share of problems, which would later come to light following the events of May 10, 2020. On May 10, 2020, the Mother's Day celebration at the Morphew residence started out differently than usual. Barry took they out of the house, leaving Suzanne alone. Barry claimed he had a landscaping appointment in Broomfield, a 3-hour drive from Mayville. Meanwhile, they went on a camping trip. Barry and they planned to return home that evening to celebrate Mother's Day with Suzanne. However, the planned celebration didn't happen that evening. They sent Suzanne a Happy Mother's Day message, but she didn't respond. They found this unusual since she was very active on social media and would likely be on her phone, expecting to see photos from her best friend's daughter's wedding. After a few hours of no response, Mallory and Macy contacted their neighbor, Martin Ritter, and his wife, asking them to check on Suzanne. Mrs. Ritter visited the Morphew house around 4 to 4:30 p.m. and found it empty. She called Barry to explain the situation, and he told her to check for Suzanne's mountain bike. If it was missing, he instructed her to call the police, which is exactly what she did. The police arrived at the Morphew home, where Barry and his 2 daughters were desperate for news about Suzanne's whereabouts. After a few hours of searching, they found their first solid lead: Suzanne's mountain bike, abandoned off a steep ravine near her home. The discovery suggested that she might have had an accident, but there was no sign of a struggle, no skid marks, no damage to the bike, and no blood. The surrounding vegetation was undisturbed, leading investigators to conclude that the bike had been deliberately placed there. Barry's reaction to this news was peculiar. He proposed an unusual theory that a mountain lion was involved in Suzanne's disappearance. This was the first of many dubious explanations, conclusions, and accounts he would offer to investigators. Many people, including Suzanne's brother Andrew, found Barry's behavior strange. In a private conversation with YouTuber Tyson Draper, which was secretly recorded, Barry elaborated on his mountain lion theory. Notably, Barry did not participate in the search parties organized by Andrew, who didn't buy Barry's story about the bike ride and suspected that Suzanne might have gone missing on May 9th, not Mother's Day. Suspicion turned to Barry when Suzanne's helmet was discovered 1 mile from the Morphew home. Directly along the route, his truck's telemetry showed he had taken that morning. Although this might have been dismissed as a strange coincidence, the crucial factor was that it was in the opposite direction of the Broomfield construction site he was scheduled to visit that day. In his initial interview, Barry claimed to have woken up to his alarm clock around 4:30 a.m. and headed straight to Broomfield, but the telemetry data from his Ford F-350 revealed that he had driven 1 mile west before proceeding to the construction site. Barry offered an explanation for the data. He said he went elk scouting at 4:30 a.m. to track them later. He had a habit of sedating elk and selling their antlers. But when officers questioned how he spotted elk at 4:30 a.m. if he was waking up, Barry changed his story, saying he woke up on his own. Barry was asked about the day Suzanne disappeared and claimed it was one of the best days the couple had in a while. He said he worked with a coworker in Salida that morning, came back early, went for a hike with Suzanne, and then they grilled steak and were intimate. He claimed they went to bed together, suggesting it might have been the last time they saw each other. However, when the police investigated Barry, they discovered he had lied about almost everything that happened that night. The first sign of deception came when they examined Barry's phone and vehicle data on May 9, 2020. While Barry and Suzanne did spend the afternoon and evening together, the details didn't match Barry's story. Between 2:42 and 2:44 p.m., phone data showed erratic movements around the property, contradicting Barry's account. When questioned, he claimed he was likely hunting chipmunks with tranquilizers at 2:47 p.m. Barry then switched his phone to airplane mode, leaving it that way until 10:17 p.m. Even the steak dinner he claimed to have shared with his wife was doubted, as only one dirty dish was found, not two. Later that night, more strange events occurred on the property, and the police discovered some disturbing details when they examined the data. At 9:30 p.m., an hour after Barry said he went to sleep with his wife, his car was reversed, moving 96 feet backward from the driveway. It's possible that he loaded her body onto his truck at this time if he was guilty. Between 3:25 and 3:48 a.m., the records show that the door to his truck opened and closed over 80 times. Although this evidence is circumstantial, it suggests that Barry was hiding something from the police, and it prompted them to take a closer look at the events of May 10th. Barry was not scheduled to be in Broomfield that day, as their contract did not start until a week later, which meant there was no project for him to inspect. Barry claimed he only visited the Holiday Inn, the job site, a local store to buy granola and water, and briefly stopped at McDonald's to clean his windshield. However, surveillance footage obtained by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation contradicted his story. The footage showed Barry disposing of 5 trash bags near McDonald's and the Holiday Inn. When questioned about his actions, Barry gave a strange explanation, saying he wanted to clean his car without paying proper disposal fees. However, when officers inspected his car, Barry's story fell apart. Additionally, a coworker reported a strong smell of bleach and chlorine in Barry's hotel room the day after Suzanne's disappearance. Investigators discovered that Barry had changed his clothes multiple times throughout the day, which seemed suspicious. However, upon further investigation, they found no clear motive for any wrongdoing when they looked into Barry's and Suzanne's personal lives. Their daughter revealed that neither of them was as happy as Barry claimed, and text messages on Suzanne's phone and personal belongings showed that they were having severe marital problems. Suzanne was deeply unhappy in the marriage and had written notes expressing her fears that her husband would not consider divorce. She kept a list of grievances that suggested a pattern of physical abuse, including fearing being alone with him and worrying about his drinking. She was also suspicious of his repeated attempts to seize her phone and suspected he was unfaithful to her. When the police searched the Morphew house on May 20th, they found a pen that Suzanne had purchased to record her husband's alleged infidelity. Ironically, the recording actually captured her own affair with a man named Jeff, whom she had known since high school. The affair had allegedly been going on for about a year and a half, starting around 2018. Although Jeff seemed like an obvious suspect, the police were able to rule out his involvement. Investigators thought that Barry must have discovered Suzanne's affair, which was supported by a note she had written 2 days before her disappearance. In the note, Barry accused her of having a boyfriend. The spy pen was not the only crucial piece of evidence found in the Morphew house. The search also turned up a tranquilizer dart cap in the dryer, a spent bullet casing in the bedroom, a large crack in the doorframe, and what appeared to be the remains of Suzanne's journal in the fireplace. When combined with the telematic data, these findings suggested that Barry might have planned and carried out the murder of his wife, likely in the afternoon of May 9, 2020. The phone data from Suzanne's phone supported this theory, showing that she had sent 53 texts to her boyfriend and a selfie at around 2:10 p.m., but then stopped using her phone altogether. The public remained unaware that Barry was a suspect in his wife's disappearance for 2 weeks, until the police conducted a 2-day excavation at a construction site in Salida, one of Barry's job locations. In response, Barry released a bizarre video proclaiming his innocence to the public. It wasn't until May 5, 2021, almost a year into the investigation, that Barry was arrested. Although the evidence against Barry was largely circumstantial, the prosecution appeared confident in their case, given his changing stories, repeated lies, and clear motive. Barry faced charges of first-degree murder in connection with his wife's death, tampering with physical evidence, possession of a dangerous weapon, and attempting to influence a public servant. Furthermore, Barry was later charged with filing a fraudulent election ballot in his wife Suzanne's name. He claimed ignorance of the wrongdoing, stating that he thought the extra vote would be helpful to Trump. Barry pleaded guilty to this charge in August 2021 and paid a $600 fine. A preliminary hearing was held to determine whether Barry Morphew's case would proceed to trial, and it was during this hearing that most of the information about the case became publicly known. Over 4 days, the prosecution presented the evidence it had gathered, revealing its theory of what might have happened. According to the prosecution, Barry murdered his wife on May 9, 2020, dismembered her body in a hotel room, disposed of the tools used, and buried her in an unmarked grave. However, the defense strongly countered the prosecution's claims, highlighting several inconsistencies. They pointed out that cadaver dogs found no signs of human remains in Barry's car or the hotel room where he allegedly kept her body. They also hinted that the dart and bullet cover might have been planted and noted visual inconsistencies in the photos taken of the dryer. Furthermore, the defense argued that it would have been impossible for Barry to have used his dart gun in the alleged murder, since it was broken at the time. The defense team's key piece of exonerating evidence was the partial DNA found in Suzanne's Range Rover and on her bike helmet, which did not match Barry's DNA. The significance of this discovery lay in the fact that the DNA found in her car matched the DNA found in 3 unsolved sexual assault cases in Chicago and Arizona, thereby raising reasonable doubt about Barry's guilt. The question remains as to why this evidence was not presented earlier. The reason was that the CBI investigator responsible for collecting the evidence had gone on military leave before he could pursue the lead further. Furthermore, the defense team was not informed about the existence of these foreign DNA matches, and they only learned about it for the first time during the hearing. This means that the prosecution withheld crucial evidence that could have assisted the defense throughout the hearing. The defense claimed that the prosecution lacked sufficient evidence to convict Barry of killing his wife, given the presence of another suspect with a criminal record. They urged the judge to make a prompt ruling, but surprisingly, he delayed his decision, citing the significant time and resources invested in the case. It wasn't until September 7th that the judge ruled the case would proceed, and he set Barry's bail at $500,000. On September 20th, 2021, 9 days before the trial was scheduled to start, Barry was released from county jail, accompanied by his daughters. The prosecution requested that all charges against Barry be dropped without prejudice. This allows them to refile the case at a later time if new evidence emerges, as long as no reasonable doubt exists about Barry's involvement in the murder and any misconduct by the prosecution. Achieving a conviction would have been an uphill battle for the prosecution, given that they also missed several deadlines, resulting in sanctions that excluded 14 crucial witnesses from the trial. Following an investigation, Suzanne's remains were identified over 50 miles away from the projected search area, which was the mountains surrounding Barry's property, through her dental records and chemotherapy port. The discovery of her body has led people to question whether Barry can still be considered a suspect in the murder, despite the police being certain that his truck was not in Moffat on May 9th and 10th. Some people suggest that Barry might have had help disposing of the body, allowing him to make the trip to Moffat to bury the body and return without being traced. Getting a subpoena for his phone and car data for a longer period could potentially link him to where Suzanne's remains were found. However, based on the current evidence, Barry appears to be in the clear. The police and district attorney's office are continuing to investigate the case despite recent developments. The district attorney of the 12th Judicial District stated that they cannot comment on the case until more information becomes available. But they have offered their condolences to Suzanne's family. Barry's attorney, Iris E.Y. Yan, has spoken out publicly since the discovery of Suzanne's body, suggesting that it is possible she was a victim of a serial killer, given the location where her remains were found. Yan believes that Barry was wrongly accused by law enforcement and hopes that they will eventually acknowledge their mistake. Meanwhile, Barry has filed a $15 million lawsuit against the prosecutors, sheriff stations, and investigators, alleging that he was wrongly charged in connection with his wife's disappearance and death. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Rebecca Bleefnick. Becky and Tim first met while they were students at Quincy University. Becky was studying biology and was also a talented tennis player, whereas Tim made a name for himself as a standout football player, earning all-star status. People who knew Tim well would often describe him as a fun-loving and playful guy who always greeted others with a warm hug. His lively personality and infectious energy made him extremely popular among his peers. On the other hand, Becky's friends would often say that she was a happy and vibrant person who could light up a room just by being there. Her positive attitude and bright smile made her instantly likable and approachable. Given that Becky and Tim were both attractive individuals, they seemed to be a perfect match for each other. Their physical appearance and chemistry together made them appear like the ideal couple. 2 years after graduating from Quincy University, Becky and Tim decided to start a new chapter in their lives by getting married. As a practical couple, they prioritized saving money over unnecessary expenses. Instead of buying Becky an expensive engagement ring, Tim decided to put their savings towards a down payment on their first home. They also opted for a more low-key honeymoon, choosing to invest their money in their future together rather than splurging on lavish celebrations. Becky wanted to be a doctor, but opted out to focus on motherhood. She craved the joy and fulfillment that came with raising kids. Her dream came true with 3 sons, bringing her immense joy and treasured moments. As the boys grew older, Becky decided to pursue her own goals and aspirations. She went back to school to earn a nursing degree. Tim, who had a talent for entertaining, had performed in community theater in Quincy and created humorous videos on social media. In 2008, he tried out for American Gladiators, making it to the final round of auditions. In September 2019, he got another chance to showcase his talent when the producers of Family Feud invited him and his family to participate in the show. However, Becky was unable to join him due to her nursing school commitments. Tim then gathered his family, including his parents and brothers, to take advantage of the opportunity. Tim's family, the Biancs, appeared on Family Feud for 3 episodes and won a total of $20,000. They divided the money equally among themselves, but Tim did not share his winnings with his wife Becky. Becky and Tim's marriage had been struggling for a while, particularly when Becky decided to become a nurse. Tim was against this career choice, claiming he was worried about the stress it would bring Becky. He said she already had trouble managing her patients and stress levels when dealing with their kids, and he wondered if she could handle the demands of the job. However, Becky's friends saw Tim's opposition differently. They thought he was uncomfortable with Becky being independent and doing things outside of his control. As time went on, Becky's friends noticed she was becoming increasingly unhappy in her marriage. While the first 5 years had been relatively positive, Tim's behavior had become more controlling and manipulative. Becky's friends observed that she was shouldering the bulk of the household responsibilities, in addition to her demanding nursing studies and job, while Tim did not pull his weight. He rarely lifted a finger to clean or care for their children, leaving Becky to handle everything on her own after her long nursing shifts. As Becky recognized the growing tensions in their marriage, she felt compelled to discuss the issue with Tim. She believed that attending marriage counseling could help them identify solutions and restore harmony to their relationship. However, Tim refused to consider counseling, which disappointed Becky. Despite Becky's efforts to address the problems in their marriage, Tim filed for divorce in January 2021 after 11 years of marriage. This caught Becky off guard, as she had demonstrated her commitment to saving their marriage. Tim claimed that the reason for his decision was a perceived change in Becky's personality after she became a nurse, which he believed had negatively impacted their marriage. Tim and Becky's divorce was extremely contentious. The couple found it difficult to agree on anything and stopped communicating effectively. They disagreed on several key issues, including who would get custody of the children, how to divide their property, and how much alimony would be paid. From Tim's perspective, the situation was already volatile. He even went so far as to request a restraining order against Becky, citing a specific incident where she became aggressive during a heated argument at a parent-teacher conference. However, Becky had a different viewpoint. She alleged that Tim was harassing her and confided in her friends through text messages. In these messages, she described several disturbing incidents, including Tim yelling at her, pushing her in front of their sons, and throwing objects across the room. Becky's anxiety was fueled by her fear that Tim might take drastic action to keep her away from their children. After a coworker was tragically murdered by her partner, Becky became increasingly concerned about her own safety, believing that Tim was capable of harming her in a similar way. Becky's sister was concerned about her sister's safety, so she encouraged Becky to seek help at a domestic violence resource center. After some time, Becky made the decision to file a restraining order against Tim, alleging that he had entered her home without her permission and had lied about their interactions. When a judge reviewed the competing orders of protection filed by Tim and Becky, he ruled against granting either of them. Instead, he ordered the two to maintain a safe distance from each other's homes, with the exception of when they exchanged custody of their children. However, in February 2023, Tim reached out to the Quincy Police Department, informing them that he refused to return a gun, citing his reluctance to hand it over to that crazy person, a clear reference to Becky. Becky and Tim were getting divorced, and it was going to be finalized in a week. At that time, their 3 sons, aged 12, 10, and 5, were staying at Tim's house, which was just a mile away from Becky's home. The next day, Tim contacted Becky's father, saying he couldn't reach Becky and that she had not picked the boys up from school as planned. Becky's father was worried because he knew how dedicated Becky was as a mother. He thought something must have happened to prevent her from taking care of her responsibilities. Concerned about Becky's well-being, her father drove to her house and went inside, calling out her name. But there was no response. He went upstairs to her bedroom and found a shocking and disturbing scene. Becky was lying on her back in a pool of blood with multiple gunshot wounds. Detectives and crime scene investigators promptly responded to Becky's house after her father's disturbing discovery of her lifeless body in the bathroom, lying face up and covered in blood. Their meticulous investigation began with a thorough examination of the exterior of Becky's home, which led to a comprehensive search to identify the point of entry. The search revealed that an upstairs window in one of the children's bedrooms had been pried open, suggesting the perpetrator used a patio chair to climb up to the roof and gain access to the house. Following the suspect's likely path, investigators proceeded to Becky's bedroom, where they found signs of forced entry on the door, indicating it had been violently kicked down or broken. The state of the bedroom door implied to investigators that the suspect had burst into the room, likely in search of Becky. Evidence suggested Becky tried to hide in the bathroom, but the suspect caught up and shot her. Investigators found her phone near her body and saw a 1:11 a.m. 911 call. They believe Becky tried to call for help while being chased, but dialed wrong and was knocked to the ground before she could try again. When officers canvassed Becky's neighborhood, no one recalled hearing anything suspicious. The lack of witnesses raised suspicions, given Becky's multiple gunshot wounds. A thorough search of her house ruled out a botched burglary, as nothing was missing. Investigators found a partial shoe print, 8 9mm shell casings, and shredded plastic near the body. Despite this evidence, they were unsure what to make of it, so they sent it to forensic labs for analysis. Detectives sought neighbors' security cameras. One neighbor had a camera on their house, facing their driveway, which bordered Becky's home. It turned on with movement, but didn't catch anything on the night of her death. However, it did capture a person walking down her driveway at 1:05 a.m. the day before, and again 48 minutes later. Becky's neighbor had also caught a similar incident on camera about a week before the main event, on February 14th. When Becky's neighbors reviewed their security footage on Valentine's Day, they saw a suspicious, dark-clad figure lurking around her house. They immediately informed Becky, who became paranoid after learning about the mysterious figure. Although Becky claimed she hadn't seen anyone on her property, she had heard strange voices in her backyard the previous night, which frightened her even more considering the security footage. The police extended their search to the rest of the neighborhood, looking for more footage of the dark-clad individual. They found videos from a house near the Quincy bus barn, which showed a person dressed in dark clothing riding a bike toward Becky's house. These additional videos were consistent with the description of the mysterious person seen in the driveway footage, showing someone riding a bike while wearing dark clothing. After analyzing the recorded times of the videos, detectives became suspicious that the person on the bike was the same individual seen in the footage from Becky's driveway. Although Becky's neighbor's security camera didn't capture the mysterious person on the night of her murder, officers found footage of someone on a bike riding towards and away from Becky's house around the time of the incident. This person's appearance matched the description of the individual seen lurking in Becky's driveway in the days leading up to her murder. Video evidence helped in Becky's murder investigation, but poor quality footage limited its usefulness. The grainy image made it hard to identify the person's gender. However, detectives did note the bike lacked reflectors on its wheels. Becky's sister suspected her estranged husband Tim of murder, having witnessed their bitter divorce. She told detectives, who then investigated Tim. The timing was suspicious, as the murder occurred a week before their divorce was to be finalized. A bike without reflectors, like one seen near Tim's house on security footage, was found, increasing suspicion and leading to a search warrant for Tim's home. When the police executed the search warrant, Tim was compliant and respectful throughout the search. He willingly stood outside his home, accompanied by the officers, as investigators looked through his belongings. On March 13, 2023, 2 weeks after Becky was murdered, Tim was arrested and charged with her murder. Tim's mugshot shocked his friends and family, showing a disheveled, unkempt man. Many thought the divorce had taken a toll on his health, but Tim claimed he was growing his hair out for a cancer charity. After his bizarre response on Family Feud, saying he regretted marrying his wife and his subsequent arrest for her murder. Many saw it as a warning sign of sinister intentions. The investigators thoroughly examined Tim's phone and discovered that he had created a Facebook account under the name John Smith. Through their investigation, the detectives learned that Tim was searching for a bicycle on Facebook and found a blue Schwinn without any reflectors on the wheels. This discovery was intriguing as it matched the description of a bike found abandoned 1 block away from Tim's residence. Detectives faced a challenge when Tim was arrested, held without bond, and demanded a speedy trial. With only 90 days to build a case, prosecutors struggled to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt without a confession or DNA evidence. 3 months after Becky's murder, Tim's trial began on May 23, 2023. The prosecution presented evidence, including shredded plastic pieces found near Becky's body, which they claimed were from an Aldi grocery bag. Similar bags were found at Tim's house. The prosecutor argued Tim used the bags as a silencer when shooting Becky and that he left DNA on them. An expert testified that Tim was likely the DNA contributor and his DNA couldn't be excluded from under Becky's fingernails. Prosecutors presented a crowbar found in Tim's basement, suggesting it was used to pry open the victim's window. An expert confirmed similarities but couldn't confirm it was the same crowbar. They also presented Tim's phone searches, including how to open a door with a crowbar and other incriminating queries. An expert testified that shell casings from the crime scene matched those found at Tim's house, suggesting the same 9mm gun was used. However, the gun, which Tim had refused to give back to Becky, was never found at his house. Jury delivers guilty verdict after 4-hour deliberation, sentencing Tim to life without parole. Becky's family feels justice is served, despite Tim's claims of innocence and plans to appeal. At sentencing, Becky's sister condemned Tim's actions, saying his choices hurt his sons, and vowed to keep Becky's memory alive for them. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Sandra Cantu. Sandra Cantu was born on March 8, 2001, in Tracy, San Joaquin County. She grew up in Orchard Estates Mobile Home Park in Tracy, California, living with her mother, grandparents, and 3 older siblings. Although her parents, Maria and Daniel, were separated, the children remained close to their father through regular phone calls. Sandra was a friendly and outgoing child who made friends easily and was well liked by both kids and adults in the neighborhood. She loved playing outside with her friends. On March 27, 2009, Sandra returned home from school around 2 p.m. and was excited to share her day with her family. Later that afternoon, she went out to play with her friends in the neighborhood, as she usually did. Before leaving the house, Sandra changed into her favorite Hello Kitty top and black leggings and hugged her mother. When dinner time approached at 7 p.m., Sandra had not returned home, which made her mother, Maria, anxious. Maria tried calling some of Sandra's friends to see if she was with them, but no one had seen her. As her worries grew, Maria drove around the neighborhood, asking people if they had seen Sandra, but no one had seen her for hours. At 7:53 p.m., Maria made an urgent call to 911 for help. When Maria reported her daughter Sandra missing, the Tracy Police Department responded promptly to the mobile home park. They initiated a thorough search of the neighborhood, questioning Maria about Sandra's clothing at the time of her disappearance. Maria recalled that Sandra was last seen wearing a pink Hello Kitty shirt, black leggings, and Hannah Montana flip-flops. The police then conducted a door-to-door inquiry, speaking with neighbors to determine if anyone had seen Sandra or observed anything unusual in the area. They also displayed Sandra's picture to all residents. The officers demonstrated a high level of commitment to finding Sandra and identifying potential leads, evident in their meticulous questioning of neighbors and dissemination of Sandra's images in the hope of ensuring her safe return. On March 27th, the police were unable to find any trace of Sandra. The following day, March 28th, they sought help from the FBI, launching a massive search operation. This effort involved cadaver dogs, helicopters, and a large team of volunteers dedicated to finding the missing 8-year-old girl. Detectives also showed Sandra's photos to everyone in the area, hoping for any information about her whereabouts. Unfortunately, no one had any leads. The search for Sandra was a traumatic experience for the Tracy community. Dozens of local volunteers joined 230 professional search and rescue personnel from 16 different agencies to thoroughly search the town for any signs of her. The U.S. Coast Guard further assisted the aerial search over Tracy by deploying a C-13 military plane equipped with state-of-the-art cameras. Sandra's disappearance quickly gained widespread media attention. Authorities initially offered a $2,000 reward for information that could help locate her or uncover clues about her disappearance. As her case received significant media coverage, the reward amount was increased to $30,000. The search for Sandra, an 8-year-old Tracy girl, continues this morning. According to investigators, Sandra Cantu went missing after walking away from her home at the Orchard Estates mobile home park in Tracy. One of the estimated 300 volunteers who joined the search over the weekend expressed their hope that Sandra would be found and returned to her family and friends. Sandra is a Hispanic girl, 4 feet tall, and weighs 45 pounds, with brown hair and brown eyes. Surveillance footage shows Sandra leaving the mobile home park around 4 p.m. and returning, but she was last seen walking away again. The key question is, where did she go that last time, and where is she now? The investigation is ongoing, and police urge anyone with information to contact Tracy authorities. Everyone searched for her, but no signs of her were found. Later, detectives examined the security camera footage installed by Sandra's grandfather. The recording showed Sandra leaving her house, heading to the park to play. When she returned, she seemed happy, skipping back home at 4 p.m. But instead of going inside, she suddenly turned and walked down the street towards one of the exits. The footage stopped at this point, leaving her next steps a mystery. This unexpected behavior was concerning, as Sandra usually followed safety rules about not leaving with strangers. The police suspected that someone or something familiar to her might have caught her attention. The investigators' initial suspect was Sandra's father, Daniel, due to his prolonged absence from her life, which was revealed during the police investigation. Additionally, they discovered that Daniel and Maria were engaged in a financial dispute related to custody issues. However, Maria assured the detective that despite their marital problems, Daniel would never be involved in Sandra's disappearance. According to Maria, Sandra had a strong bond with her father, and they got along well. The media later interviewed Daniel about his missing child. When asked for a statement, Daniel recounted receiving a call from his sister on Friday, informing him that Sandra was missing. He rushed to the scene and waited for a day before returning to work. Daniel stressed that the purpose of the interview was to shift the attention away from himself and onto the potential perpetrator, if there was one. He urged the detective to do their job to the best of their ability, emphasizing the need to focus on finding the real person behind Sandra's disappearance. A week after Sandra Cantu's disappearance, the 8-year-old girl's whereabouts remained unknown. In Tracy, authorities were pursuing hundreds of leads and increasing the reward for information about her. Investigators were combing through trash at the local landfill, searching nearby rivers, and looking into suspicious individuals, including residents of the mobile park and those seen in the area on March 27th. These individuals included an unknown ice cream vendor who had interacted with children in the neighborhood that day, and Frank Waller, a neighbor of the Cantu family, who was rumored to be a pedophile. Frank had previously admitted to kissing Sandra on the lips 2 years earlier, claiming it was a friendly gesture. Despite the disturbing nature of his admission, the authorities ultimately cleared him as a suspect, though they made it clear they would keep a close eye on him. Meanwhile, the search for the real perpetrator continued, and the community rallied around Maria, showing her support and love during this tough period. At 8:30 p.m., neighbor Melissa discovered a disturbing handwritten note near a mailbox just miles from Sandra's family. It read, "Cantu, locked in stolen suitcase thrown in water on Boucher Road and Whitehall Road." The note had obvious spelling mistakes, sparking questions. Was it real or meant to confuse the investigation? Melissa told FBI agents she didn't notice anyone or anything unusual when she found the note. She let them search her car, where they found a post-it note in the glove box with scribbled out words. The note was sent to experts for analysis. Following this discovery, they chose to release Melissa and shift their attention back to analyzing the original note found near the mailbox. Weeks went by, but authorities could not find any traces of Sandra. After 10 long days of searching for Sandra, her case took a shocking turn. The police chief told us that the person or persons responsible for the death of 8-year-old Sandra Cantu would be brought to justice. Sandra's death has devastated the community. Jose Luis Franco, a farm worker, found a locked black suitcase while draining a pond. The weight of the case sparked dread, and their fears were realized. Inside, Sandra's lifeless body was curled up, dressed in black leggings and a Hello Kitty shirt, with many cuts and wounds. A torn cloth was tied around her head, covered in blood, evoking shock and sorrow. Sandra's body was sent to undergo an autopsy to gather more information about her death. The results of the autopsy were devastating and added to the shock and horror surrounding her death. The autopsy revealed disturbing details. Sandra had been brutally assaulted, but there was no sign of any biological fluids. The injuries suggested that an unknown object had been used, and the cause of her death was asphyxiation. Furthermore, the coroner found a large amount of alprazolam in her system, indicating that she had been drugged. The official cause of death was recorded as homicide by asphyxiation. Sadly, it was discovered that she was murdered just hours after she was last seen on surveillance footage, a terrifying fact that sent shockwaves through the community. The description of the neighbor matched a woman named Melissa Huck. Investigators checked the CCTV camera at Sandra's house and confirmed that Melissa owned the same type of car. The footage showed Melissa getting into her SUV from a parking spot directly across the street from her house around 3:30 p.m. She drove towards her residence, which was located to the left of Sandra's house. Later, Melissa visited her grandparents' church before being seen by a resident near the pond at approximately 5:30 p.m. This timeline was surprising, as it established that Melissa was in the area around the time Sandra disappeared. The police had identified a prime suspect in the case, Melissa. They strongly believed she was the perpetrator and wanted to question her. However, when they approached her, they discovered that she had attempted to take her own life by swallowing razor blades. As a result, Melissa was hospitalized, and the police were forced to wait until she recovered before they could interrogate her. Once she was well enough, Melissa claimed to have no knowledge of the events surrounding the case and maintained that her only involvement was bringing the note to their attention. She told the officers that at 4 p.m. on the day Sandra was last seen, she had been at her church, decorating her classroom, and had not seen anything unusual in the area. The police unsurprisingly asked Melissa to confirm her alibi, which her phone records ultimately supported as crucial evidence. It turned out that Melissa had earlier called the police herself to report the theft of her suitcase from her driveway. She explained that after learning about Sandra's disappearance, she had even sent Maria a text message telling the police she had been robbed around 4 p.m., although she wasn't sure if that detail was significant. The stolen suitcase proved to be a crucial piece of evidence in the investigation. The black Eddie Bauer suitcase containing Sandra was identical to the one Melissa had reported stolen, which added to its significance. The note Melissa found not only mentioned a suitcase, but specifically referred to a stolen one. Although the authorities had gathered substantial evidence implicating Melissa, they sought additional information. They decided to wiretap her phone and waited patiently for her release from the hospital. 2 days later, when Melissa was discharged from the hospital, the police were stunned to discover that she had called the Canto family. During their conversation, Melissa invited one of Sandra's siblings to her home to play with her supposedly 5-year-old daughter. Responding to her residence immediately, the officers found no children inside, suggesting that Melissa might have been planning to lure another young victim into her house. A second neighbor has come forward with a disturbing revelation. Just before Sandra's disappearance, Melissa had taken a 7-year-old girl from the neighborhood to the park without her parents' permission. When the child returned, she was disoriented, slurred her speech, and had trouble walking. Her parents took her to the hospital, where tests revealed she had been drugged with benzodiazepines, the same drug found in Sandra's body. Although Melissa denied giving the girl drugs, the incident raised suspicions. As the investigation continued, the police grew increasingly suspicious of Melissa. They were shocked to learn about the drugged child. Soon after, they obtained a warrant to search Melissa's trailer and her grandparents' church. During the trailer search, they found a notebook with handwriting that exactly matched the note Melissa had claimed to have found on the ground. This discovery provided a crucial link between Melissa and the note, leaving the police stunned. Later, experts analyzing the post-it note found in Melissa's car's glove box made a stunning revelation. The note featured cryptic words, including Bache Road, Whitehall Road, and water, which added a mysterious layer to the ongoing investigation. Furthermore, they discovered alprazolam in Melissa's purse, a drug prescribed to her, which matched the substance found in Sandra's body. During the 2009 search of Clover Road Baptist Church, a blood-stained rolling pin was found with Sandra's DNA. A draw cord was missing from a window blind, and the cord used on the Eddie Bow suitcase matched the remaining church blinds. Melissa Huckabee, a 28-year-old Sunday school teacher, was arrested on April 10, 2009. Initially, she denied involvement, but later confessed, stating Sandra's death was an accident. She persuaded Sandra to enter a suitcase for a game with her daughter, and later found her lifeless body. Melissa claimed that she had played a game of hide-and-seek with Sandra, suggesting that Sandra hide in a suitcase and then jump out to surprise her own daughter and sister. Sandra allegedly agreed to the plan and zipped herself inside the suitcase. Melissa then said that she had forgotten Sandra was inside and didn't remember until she arrived at a church, where she opened the case to find Sandra unresponsive. In a panic, Melissa attempted to perform CPR and used a small wet towel to cool Sandra's forehead, but admitted she didn't know how to handle the situation. Later, Melissa got rid of the suitcase containing Sandra's body in a nearby pond. However, the investigators found that Melissa was not telling the truth when they looked into her personal life and discovered a history of criminal activity, depression, and other mental health issues. Melissa's legal history was well documented, and court records revealed that she pleaded no contest to felony second-degree commercial burglary and misdemeanor property theft charges on January 9th. A criminal complaint highlighted her prior convictions, including a 2006 property theft conviction that resulted in jail time in Los Angeles County. In November 2008, she was accused of attempting to steal from a store while on probation in San Juan County and had a scheduled court date. Melissa had also filed for bankruptcy in 2003, citing credit card debt and medical expenses. Melissa's father said she struggled with depression and finding her path after college. Her ex-husband confirmed her depression and self-image issues, but described her as carefree. They married in 2003, separated in 2004, and divorced in 2005, with Melissa getting full custody of their 5-year-old daughter. John Huckabee was shocked when he learned that his ex-wife Melissa was involved in the murder of a young girl. He couldn't believe it, saying it's not something you want to think anyone is capable of, especially someone you know and who is the mother of your child. After they separated, Melissa moved to Southern California to live with her parents, which made it difficult for John to see his daughter. During a past custody battle, Melissa had made accusations against John, claiming he was guilty of alcohol abuse and domestic violence, which he strongly denied. John, who had lost touch with Melissa for over 3 years, was now seeking custody of their daughter. He had started a new family, remarrying and having 2 more children. However, the idea of Melissa being involved in the rape and murder of a child seemed impossible to comprehend. At trial, Melissa Huckabee showed emotion when the judge announced her crimes. Throughout, prosecutor Thomas Testa argued Melissa had planned Sandra's murder. He showed surveillance footage of Sandra heading to Melissa's house. Testa claimed Melissa drugged Sandra with juice at a church, then waited for her to pass out before attacking and suffocating her. The prosecutor, Thomas Testa, initially intended to push for the death penalty in the case against Melissa Huckabee because she had not admitted to the horrific crimes. But a turning point came during the trial when Melissa suddenly decided to plead guilty, accepting full responsibility for what she had done. During the trial, Judge Linda Loftus of San Juan County Superior Court questioned Melissa Huckabee to ensure she understood the consequences of pleading guilty. Judge Loftus asked Melissa if she had discussed the matter with her lawyers and if she was certain about giving up her right to a jury trial. Melissa affirmed that she had and reiterated her decision to plead guilty. After completing her questioning, prosecutor Thomas Testa expressed concerns about Melissa's mental health. He highlighted her unusual behavior in prison, including a recent incident where she attempted to harm herself, which raised questions about her ability to make rational decisions. Testa noted that Melissa appeared coherent and rational in court, but he was worried about her mental state in the long run. Melissa Huckabee's guilty plea was a pivotal moment in the case. By admitting her guilt, she brought some closure to the Cantu family, saving them from a long and painful trial. This significant development altered the course of the court proceedings and paved the way for what would happen next in Sandra's case. Melissa's guilty plea simplified the process and provided the Cantu family with some comfort after all they had endured since Sandra's tragic death. On June 14, 2010, Melissa Huckabee received a life sentence without parole for the first-degree murder and kidnapping of Sandra Cantu. The motivations behind Sandra's tragic death remain unclear. Prosecutors believed Melissa planned the crime to harm Sandra intentionally. Despite this, Melissa never disclosed her reasons, leaving investigators baffled. However, documents revealed a troubled individual with a history of depression, self-harm, and a difficult past. Melissa is now serving her life sentence at San County Jail, burdened by the gravity of her actions. Her imprisonment serves as a reminder that severe crimes have severe consequences. For the Cantu family, the pain of losing Sandra will never fully subside, but they find comfort in knowing justice has been served. The trial and conviction brought a sense of closure, ensuring Sandra's tragic death did not go unpunished. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kelsey Turner. Kelsey Turner was born on March 5, 1993, in Norfolk, Virginia, to Samantha Ingram, a would-be model and dancer, and Christopher Ingram, a laborer. As the second child, she grew up with her older brother Colin. Shortly after her birth, the family moved to Jonesboro, Arkansas, where Kelsey spent most of her childhood. After her parents divorced a few years later, her father returned to Virginia and lost contact with his former wife and children. Kelsey developed into a stunning beauty with a perfect figure, ideal for modeling. She wasn't interested in school, preferring to attend parties, go on dates, and participate in events. Her dream was to become famous, feature on magazine covers, give interviews, and walk the red carpet. Although she lacked talent, her youth and good looks were her biggest assets. In high school, Kelsey began attending modeling castings with her mother Samantha's strong support. Samantha had once aspired to be a model herself, and was enthusiastic about her daughter's endeavors. However, Kelsey only managed to secure a couple of shoots for clothing catalogs. At 18, Kelsey married Judy Turner when she was already pregnant. Shortly after, she gave birth to a daughter named Beverly. However, their marriage was brief and ended in divorce by the time she was 20. After abandoning her runway modeling career, Kelsey decided to pursue a career as a men's magazine model. She created a portfolio featuring provocative photos and submitted them to various publications, which quickly caught the attention of several men's magazines. Kelsey viewed this as the start of a promising career and her path to a glamorous, carefree lifestyle, which she had always aspired to. Over the next few years, she regularly received offers for photo shoots. She enthusiastically gave interviews, attended events, and attempted to establish valuable connections. Notable highlights of her career included one-off shoots for Playboy and Maxim, as well as a photo session and interview with 110 magazine. For these opportunities, she traveled to Los Angeles and Las Vegas. In an interview, Kelsey candidly described herself, stating that she was a blonde with a curvy figure and a slim waist, and asked what more one would need for happiness. She also shared that she enjoyed partying, spending time with friends, and living life to the fullest, believing that life is short and should be lived beautifully and joyfully. Kelsey was not overly concerned about her future, frequently changed partners, and quickly spent the money she earned or received from admirers. At 23, Kelsey had another child, a son named Josh, but the father refused to acknowledge him or marry her. As her modeling career declined, Kelsey turned to social media to build a following. She regularly posted provocative photos of herself in swimsuits, lingerie, and revealing outfits, which were heavily edited to make her look like a Barbie doll. She also shared pictures of herself at trendy boutiques, nightclubs, and popular entertainment venues, creating an illusion of a luxurious and carefree life. However, behind this facade, Kelsey, a single mother of 2 young children, was struggling to make ends meet. She didn't know how to manage her finances wisely and spent all her money as soon as she got it. In 2016, Kelsey faced a serious crisis after an incident involving her daughter, who was left traumatized and became withdrawn and mute, despite being physically unharmed. The incident led to therapy sessions with Dr. Thomas Burchard, a renowned child psychiatrist in Monterey, California, which ultimately contributed to a tragic event years later. Dr. Thomas Kirk Burchard was born in Boston, Massachusetts, on February 16, 1948, to a family of a prominent architect and engineer. His family later moved to Virginia, where his father taught at Harvard and the Architectural College at the Technological Institute. Thomas spent his childhood and youth in Virginia. Unlike his father, Thomas chose a career in medicine, specifically child psychology. After graduating from medical school and completing his thesis, Thomas worked as a pediatric psychiatry resident in several prestigious hospitals and lectured at colleges nationwide. Eventually, Dr. Burchard was employed at a public clinical hospital on the Monterey Peninsula in California, where he worked for over 40 years as a highly sought-after pediatric psychiatrist. Dr. Burchard was a highly respected doctor with a reputation for connecting with his young patients and taking on the toughest cases. He had a doctorate from the University of California, Berkeley, and an impressive academic record with over 300 scientific publications, cited nearly 40,000 times, giving him an H-index of 81. He was also known for his kindness, responsiveness, and generosity, particularly towards his young patients from low-income families. He even paid for hospital treatments for sick children and assisted single mothers. Dr. Burchard lived with a woman named D.Y., who was described as his assistant, housekeeper, lover, or fiancée. She was close to him and the first to notice changes in his behavior, which suggested early signs of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. As he approached his 70th birthday, Dr. Burchard became increasingly forgetful, absent-minded, and inattentive. To cope, he kept detailed diaries and notebooks to record everything, including names, dates, and events, to avoid confusion. He always carried a notebook with him containing sensitive information like banking details, account numbers, passwords, and card pins. Dr. Thomas Burchard's trusting nature led him to increase his financial support to those in need from hundreds to thousands of dollars. Kelsey Turner took advantage of Dr. Burchard's generosity. During her first visit with her daughter, she tearfully told the doctor that as a single mother of two, she couldn't afford his expensive services. Feeling empathetic, Dr. Burchard offered to treat her child for free and even gave her $300 to help with her children's needs. Kelsey was surprised, but soon realized that by sharing fabricated, tearful stories about her struggles, she could extract more money from the elderly doctor. At their next session, she concocted a performance, tearfully describing her younger son's illness and claiming she couldn't afford his expensive medication. This time, she specified a fake amount, and Dr. Burchard gave it to her in full. Kelsey's luck had changed, and from that point on, she frequently fabricated emotional stories to extract large sums of money from the trusting older man. Instead of using the money to support her children, she spent it on her own leisure activities, luxury clothing, and beauty treatments. Unwilling to return to her hometown in Virginia, Kelsey convinced Thomas to pay for her rental housing in California, claiming it would be easier to find a job and the climate was better for her children. It didn't take much persuasion for the doctor to agree, and he paid for the apartment. There were whispers that Kelsey and Thomas were romantically involved, and that this was the reason the respected doctor accommodated her every request. While these whispers may have held some truth, Kelsey maintained that Thomas had a paternal affection for her and her children, and was helping them selflessly. This was supported in court by Judy, although she added that Kelsey shamelessly took advantage of the doctor's kindness and his declining mental state due to dementia. Thomas paid for Kelsey's rental housing, bills, and gave her large sums of cash for necessities. He also rented a luxurious Mercedes-Benz convertible for her, rather than a practical family vehicle suitable for transporting children safely. As Kelsey's modeling career came to an end, her youth faded, and she stopped receiving offers for photo shoots. But instead of getting a job, she relied on her wealthy benefactor, Thomas, for financial support. Over nearly 3 years, Kelsey tried to break free from Thomas, blackmailing and threatening him. Despite this, he spent around $500,000 on her and her children. However, Kelsey wasted all the money on luxuries, including breast augmentation and liposuction, hoping to revive her modeling career. She prioritized partying over her children, neglecting them in the process. As a result, her ex-husband gained sole custody of their daughter through the court, stripping Kelsey of her parental rights. She was left with only her younger son, whose father had never shown interest in his child. Thomas was furious when he discovered what was happening, not because of the girl's ex-husband, but because of Kelsey's behavior. He realized she was a neglectful mother who didn't care for her children and spent all the money meant for them on her own desires, entertainment, and clothes. Dr. Burchard decided to have a serious talk with Kelsey, telling her he would no longer fund her extravagant and idle lifestyle. In response, Kelsey threatened to spread false rumors that the respected child psychiatrist had inappropriate, intimate interests in his young patients. Although this was a lie, any gossip on the matter could severely damage the doctor's reputation. Reluctantly, Burchard agreed to Kelsey's terms and continued to transfer money and pay her bills. In early 2019, Kelsey decided to move to Las Vegas with her son, intending to revive her modeling career. As usual, she expected Thomas, whom she continued to blackmail, to finance this venture. The doctor rented a house that Kelsey had chosen and transferred the amount of money she requested. After this, Kelsey disappeared for 2 months without giving any sign of her whereabouts. In late February 2019, Kelsey resurfaced because she was running out of money. She called Thomas, crying, and told him about her severe illness, inability to work, and struggle to provide for her son. However, when the doctor refused to help, Kelsey's tone changed abruptly, and she began threatening and blackmailing him again. It's crucial to highlight that Judy had been pushing Dr. Burchard for a while to report Kelsey to the authorities, exposing her blackmail and extortion attempts. Judy also recommended getting Child Protective Services involved, considering Kelsey's past, having already lost parental rights to her older daughter, and her inability to properly care for her young son. Anticipating a potential court case, Dr. Burchard took steps to ensure he had the backing of his colleagues, keeping them informed about the situation and securing their promises of support. To persuade Kelsey to leave Thomas alone, Judy previously tried talking to her directly, but Kelsey responded with threats of retaliation. This time, Dr. Burchard decided to travel to Las Vegas to verify Kelsey's claims, knowing what he would likely find. Judy attempted to discourage him from going, but the elderly man was resolute. She then advised him to bring her or one of his friends along, but Thomas insisted that this was a personal matter that he needed to resolve on his own. Dr. Burchard set out on his journey on March 1, 2019. On the morning of March 7th, a group of tourists driving through Nevada took a detour from the main highway onto a dirt road leading to Lake Mead. They stumbled upon a solitary Mercedes-Benz convertible parked in the middle of the desert with its windows up and roof closed, but no one in sight. The tourists found this suspicious and decided to investigate. As they approached the vehicle, they noticed one of the windows was shattered. Upon peering inside, they discovered signs of a violent struggle with bloodstains throughout the interior. The tourists promptly reported their disturbing discovery to the police. Law enforcement officers arrived at the scene around noon, greeted by an overwhelming stench of decay under the scorching sun. The source of the odor was quickly located when they opened the trunk of the car. Beneath a pile of items and rags, they found the lifeless body of an elderly man, next to whom lay a blood-stained baseball bat. It was later confirmed that the body belonged to Dr. Burchard, who had been missing for 5 days. Judy had reported his disappearance on March 2nd, when she couldn't reach him at their scheduled time, and she immediately feared the worst. She contacted the police, hoping against hope that he would be found alive. Tragically, that was not the case. The autopsy revealed a horrific series of injuries on the elderly man's body. He had sustained multiple abrasions, bruises, and superficial cuts. The examination also showed that he had suffered severe head injuries, likely inflicted by the baseball bat found beside him in the trunk. Part of his ear had been severed, and his hands bore numerous cuts, suggesting a desperate attempt to defend himself. Additionally, there were bruises on his face with a peculiar imprinted pattern. The most shocking discovery, however, was that the man had been placed in the trunk while still alive, where he slowly suffocated under the intense desert sun. As the police investigated the crime scene, they discovered that the car was rented in Kelsey Turner's name, making her the prime suspect. Judy provided the authorities with the address of the house where the blonde lived and where the deceased doctor had gone, as it was also rented in his name. However, when the police arrived, they found the house empty. Inside, they noticed scattered containers of cleaning agents and a strong smell of household chemicals, indicating a hasty attempt to erase any evidence of the crime. The house had been occupied by Turner, her 4-year-old son, her new boyfriend John Logan Kennison, and 2 neighbors, Diana Pina and Jeremy Eric. Since they had all fled, they became suspects, as it seemed unlikely that the petite blonde could have inflicted such severe injuries on the doctor or moved his body to the car trunk alone. The police managed to interview Jeremy, who recalled that he and his girlfriend had left the house while the doctor was still alive and unharmed. According to Jeremy, his girlfriend had drunk too much and flirted with the doctor, trying to get a few $100s, similar to Kelsey's tactics. This had enraged Kelsey, who accused the woman of trying to steal her boyfriend. The 2 women almost got into a fight, and Jeremy had to quickly take his girlfriend away from the house. He hadn't returned for several days and was unaware of the subsequent events. police discovered that Dr. Burchard habitually carried a notebook containing bank account details and passwords, but frequently misplaced it. Following his murder, the notebook went missing, and substantial sums were withdrawn from 2 of his accounts on March 3rd. The authorities promptly blocked the accounts and cards, and on March 21st, Kelsey and her boyfriend J.N. were apprehended in Stockton, California, after a second attempt to withdraw funds. Prior to their arrest, the couple, accompanied by their child, had been evading detection by hiding in motels, constantly changing their location and paying in cash. They later expressed regret for not completely depleting Burchard's accounts initially, and subsequently planned to empty them and flee to Mexico with the money. However, by the time they made their second attempt, the authorities had already blocked the accounts, leading to their capture. According to Diana, after Jeremy and his girlfriend left, a heated argument broke out between Turner and Dr. Burchard. This was triggered by the doctor's refusal to give Turner another cent. In a fit of rage, Turner threatened to ruin Dr. Burchard's reputation by spreading false rumors about his behavior with his young patients. As the situation escalated and Turner became physically aggressive, Dr. Burchard locked himself in a room for safety. However, J.N. forced open the door and violently attacked the elderly doctor with a bat, causing a severe hematoma and a nosebleed. Diana intervened, begging everyone to calm down. Upon seeing Dr. Burchard's condition, she urged them to take him to the hospital, worried about the consequences of their actions. Before they left, Dr. Burchard promised Diana that he would report to the police that he was attacked and robbed by strangers. The 4 of them then drove to the garage, where Dr. Burchard was seated in the back of the car. Kelsey instructed Diana to return to the house and thoroughly clean up, making sure to remove all traces of blood. Diana started cleaning as told, but heard Dr. Burchard's cries from the garage. Rushing back, she saw Kelsey and Kennison brutally attacking him, trapping him in the car. It was clear they never meant to take him to the hospital, but planned to kill him with a bat and knife. Diana was forced back to cleaning, fearing for her life. Later, she heard the cars drive away, and only Johns returned with Kelsey. From the start, Diana chose to cooperate with the authorities by agreeing to a plea deal, which meant she would reveal everything she knew about the case. In return, she avoided being charged with being an accomplice and received a relatively light 3-year sentence for tampering with evidence. In contrast, her former lovers refused to take responsibility and instead blamed each other for the crime. However, it was easy to prove their guilt because they left behind significant evidence in the car, and phone records showed they were in the desert on the night of March 2nd, where the car with the body was abandoned. Kennison was convicted of second-degree homicide and received a 45-year prison sentence, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. The situation with Turner was more complicated. After her arrest, she announced that she was pregnant, which significantly delayed her trial. While in prison, she gave birth to a girl, and both the newborn and her son were placed in the care of social services because none of Turner's relatives were willing to take on the responsibility. In January 2023, following her lawyer's advice, Kelsey Turner admitted her guilt and was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole no earlier than 10 years from the start of her sentence. She is currently serving her sentence at the Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center in Las Vegas. In conclusion, it is worth noting that ABC's documentary series 20th Century aired an episode in February 2023 titled A Model Murder, which detailed the heinous crime committed by Turner and her boyfriend against Dr. Burchard.